Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if female Naruto pregnant with her student child. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. October 10th, surely a worse day never existed for this one subject under Kami's ruling. Nope, Naomi did not like October 10th, the day of the Kyuubi's attack 10 years ago and her birthday. It would be more accurate to state that she abso-fucking-lutely hated it in fact. Much more accurate. So if she hated this day so fiercely, why then could she be found outside on a day that no doubt called for sitting in the darkest corner of her apartment? Well, it might have something to do with the large pillar of smoke and fire coming from the red light district, where she lived. Why would a child live in the red light district of any village, much less one with such a prestigious standing, you ask? Well, she doesn't really know. Oh, she knows the normal facts, like no landlord would let her into their buildings in the better parts of town. She also knew that tiny apartment with barely any rooms was all she could afford on her measly stipend. She thought though that it was because she was an orphan, so she was automatically given the worst things a body had to offer for her. Back to the subject of October 10th and her building's untimely demise though. She had meant to stay in her building all day and night long, but it seemed some of the more rowdy neighbors had other ideas. At least they didn't know about the secret trapdoor she installed that led her out to the roof. She might have been in trouble then. Getting off the building was no trouble at all for any academy student, even one as low in the brackets as herself. So now she found herself hiding behind a billboard for topical cream, watching the smoke drifting up the sky and the shinobi running around and trying to put it out. She felt moderately bad about that, mainly because these were no ordinary shinobi. These were the Anbu and the one they answered to, the Hokage. Hokage-sama was the only one who cared for her at all, and she knew that up until a month ago he hadn't even known where she lived. When he did find out, she had witnessed the utter fury of an aged war-hardened Kage. Back to the present predicament of not wishing to give away her hiding place but knowing the old man was worried for her. It was a strange concept that no one felt worry for anyone else in the red light district, least of all for her. Not to mention he didn't act the same with every orphan either. All in all, it slightly bothered her that he turned his attentions to her. It wasn't the norm. She had just made the decision to step out and calm the worried old man when she felt arms encircle her waist and a cloth clamped over her mouth and nose. A smell that in normal circumstances would have made her feel sick was all she registered before collapsing into the mysterious man's arms, unable to stay awake. The man hefted her over his shoulder and darted away to the shadows, eager to complete what so long ago the Yondaime started. Many hours later, a groan alerted him that his charge had awakened and a grin spread across his face as hers twisted in horror. It would only be 30 minutes but they seemed hours to the poor child before he finally grew fatigued and passed out beside her. Sniffing away more tears as she gently closed her legs, Naomi instantly turned to the man to see if he would stir. He hadn't tied her very tightly, it seemed the man was only a civilian. These knots would hold a normal girl, but she was training to be a kunoichi and considered these knots rather insulting. She knew what had happened, she knew that she'd never have that same innocence again. It was a danger hazard for all women in the red light district. What she did not know though, was that since she had already become a woman earlier than most, one seed managed to find that egg. Her maturing body would be at fault for what she later would call the most unexpected surprise of her life. She limped away from the man and briefly looked back, unsure what to do about him. Wasn't she supposed to call the police or something? After the Uchiha massacre though, Anbu had been called in to deal with these kinds of situations. What was more, unless the Sandaime set specific guidelines, the Anbu hardly treated her with anything bordering decency. In the end she turned away and limped as best she could up the stairs, happy to see moving around seemed to ease the pain somewhat. Meanwhile, Hiruzen sighed in relief as he saw through his orb the young girl carefully easing out of an old shed she must have used as shelter. He would need to do something about her lodgings, but for now he watched her trek to the academy to start another day on her quest for his hat. Perhaps he could lose some money where she would find it. Naomi Uzumaki got to class earlier than her classmates, but she saw this as a blessing and settled down at her desk and slipped into a slumber unhindered by nightmares. When she awoke again, it was to find that two fangirls, Ino and Sakura, were again fighting for the seat next to Sasuke Uchiha, the last survivor of the massacre. Fidgeting slightly in her seat, she turned her thoughts away from Konoha's history and to more important matters. She would no doubt have more difficulty finding a new apartment now that hers had burned down. After all, what landlord wants that risk? She also had no money with which to rent one, or food, or extra clothing for that matter. Slumping slightly at the thought of sleeping in an alley tonight, she attempted to turn her attention to trap setting. Normally this would be enough to drive her out of any civilian-induced funk, but today she just couldn't make herself get lost in the ins and outs of pulleys and tripwires. Not even the possibility of pranks or ramen made her crack a smile that day. Strangely enough, she found a small fortune outside after the final bell, seemingly dropped by a careless citizen. She would normally try asking if anyone had dropped it, but chose not to as a smell wafted to her nose. Ichiraku ramen after a long 2 days of no food would do wonders for her spirits, surely. After eating what may very well have been her weight in noodles, she went back to the district and started what she feared would be a fruitless search for an apartment. She started at the most rundown apartment she could find, and amazingly enough struck gold. As it seemed, the landlady was willing to sell the admittedly tiny complex for just the amount in her little bag. The lady relinquished the papers and when questioned said she was moving from Konoha because she couldn't make a decent business anymore due to her age. Instantly realizing this woman had been a corner girl, Naomi didn't ask any more questions and only signed on the dotted line as directed. Good luck, Gaki. The old woman sighed as she hefted a last bag onto her cart and slapped the reins onto the horse's backside. Naomi hesitantly waved a farewell before going inside to inspect her new property. Least I don't have to pay rent anymore, she mumbled, content with this turn of events. Who knew she'd get not one apartment, but the whole complex for the low price of 500,000 yen. She even still had enough left over to afford instant ramen until she got her next stipend. Settling down into the landlady's office, as she now had to live there since she owned the building, she decided to practice her new jutsu. After all, henge jutsu sounded really cool and Kawarimi had saved her life already once. If she used henge, maybe people wouldn't overcharge her for things. Unknown to all but herself, this started what would aid her in taking care of the little bundle of surprises that she unwittingly carried. The following 2 years would give birth to the best infiltration, demolition, trap, stealth kunoichi to have ever graced the hallowed halls of the academy. Naomi meanwhile had just finished the final touches on a henge she was rather passionate about. She was curious about what she would look like as an adult, and so with a little tweaking, made what she would laughingly dub the oiro no jutsu with clothing. I still look like me, but maybe if I change the hair, eyes, and the birthmarks. She muttered in a determined fashion. Struck by inspiration, she made the seals again and when the smoke cleared, there stood a red-haired woman with sea-green eyes and unblemished features. She would, many years later, learn that she had just transformed into the spitting image of her mother. After a final inspection, she set out to begin shopping for some food and perhaps even furniture, depending on how much ramen she bought. Her brows coming together in sudden worry, she realized she wouldn't be able to buy as much ramen as she usually did. She didn't want to accidentally give away her identity. Another thought occurred to her, and in it an idea that shook her foundations to their core. She would simply act the opposite of how she would usually act. No one would connect Naomi Uzumaki with Ran Yurichi, thus dubbing her new form of course. She stepped into the grocery store and was startled to be greeted by a smile and a welcome. Smiling in what she hoped looked a kindly fashion, she quickly moved to the aisles. She bought 5 instant ramens, some eggs, milk, and a jug of orange juice. After all, she didn't want to blow her cover, and she knew how to make scrambled eggs anyway, so it was a win-win situation in her mind. Hello miss, running a few errands? The cashier made small talk. Oh, hi, Ran answered demurely, trying to act like that girl with the funny white eyes in her class. Excuse me for being rude miss, but are you pregnant? The question caught her by surprise and unbidden, a blush covered her face. What gave you such an idea? She asked him. Ma, I've always had this weird sixth sense that lets me know when a woman is pregnant for some reason. From your look I guess it wouldn't be an absurd theory. The man chuckled as he finished ringing up her items. Ran was startled at the prices. They were so low. She knew she was overcharged but she didn't think it was by such a large margin. Well, I don't think I'm pregnant but maybe I'll take this just in case. She had noticed them sitting nearby in the medicine aisle and after hearing that man's prediction, she thought it would be better safe than sorry. He winked and rung that up as well before bidding her a good day. She didn't drop the henge, choosing instead to try and get a little experience in the nods of acknowledgement she was receiving. She'd have to be a really good actress to make this work after all. She unlocked the front door of the apartment building when she was stopped by a voice. "Excuse me, is Rukia-san here?" a young man asked her. She remembered Rukia being the name of the old woman. "I'm afraid she's not. I recently bought the entire building actually," she said as politely as she could manage. "Well then I guess I have to talk to you," the young man said pleasantly. "You see, I need a new apartment." She nodded hesitantly and led him inside her office. At least she knew about getting and giving apartments from when she first bought them. Rukia seemed insistent to teach her the arts of the trade before leaving. "Anyo, it's all in order. I hope everything is to your liking," she said politely, handing over the key to the second-story apartment. Warning: I don't know or care about exchange rates. They keep fucking changing. With only 20,000 yen for rent, I'm sure it will be good enough. I'm Ichigo Kurosaki, by the way, he said introduction before leaving to pack his bags. It seemed she had her first tenant already. Now though, it posed a problem. For one, that man she knew was a villager from further up the road where she used to live, and thus knew her. For another, he thought the new landlady of this building was Ran Yurichi. I guess Naomi will just have to be careful about never being around Ichigo-san, she told herself. She could see the benefits of being paid monthly, and he wouldn't want to stay if he knew she was really Naomi Uzumaki. She'd just have to get a lot of extra training in henge and acting, that's all. She set her groceries into the fridge and decided to look over the papers about this building. As landlady, it would be her job to make sure everything ran smoothly after all. She smiled to herself, rather enjoying her newfound job. If the shinobi thing didn't work out, at least she could still make a living as a landlady. She was rather disheartened to learn that the electricity would need repairs, but everything else seemed in working condition, if in need of a few upgrades. She'd just have to save up. According to the little chart in her new little office, electricity repairs would cost about 50,000 for the entire building. It works, it just doesn't work all the time, she muttered to herself. If I wait, it will take 3 months before I have enough to repair it. If I get an after-school job though, then maybe I could do it sooner? She considered. It sounded like a good plan. She'd work on it tomorrow. For now though, she was tired from keeping up the henge all day and decided to eat and go to sleep early tonight. Tomorrow would be a big day. The pregnancy test would lay forgotten for a few weeks yet. 1 month later, Naomi groaned upon awakening and rushed to the bathroom that joined with her bedroom. Thank goodness for small kindness, for if the bathroom were any further away she would have had a mess to clean up and no doubt would be late for class. Why'd I keep getting sick? She groaned aloud after emptying yesterday's dinner into the toilet. She moaned about the taste in her mouth and rinsed it out before catching sight of herself in the mirror. Was it just her, or did the chest of her nightshirt seem a little tighter for some reason? She concluded that yes, she had indeed begun growing breasts, the first in her class too. She would have smiled if she didn't notice the accusing pregnancy test sitting innocently in the medicine cabinet behind her through the mirror. Didn't she once hear that enlarged breasts and sickness were the first signs of pregnancy? That's silly, I'm just a kid. I can't be a mom. She laughed nervously, resisting the urge to knock on the wooden door. She had tried to forget the test and that silly cashier, but no matter what, especially after getting sick all the time, her mind was drawn to the both of them. She would really enjoy forgetting about her birthday, but it seemed that until she manned up a little, it would haunt her. Besides, she was a kid. It was silly to be afraid of something that was impossible. Kids didn't get pregnant. Still though, that day she took the test. 5 minutes later she still couldn't bring herself to see the results. She ended up leaving the test sitting in the sink, to await her return. She hanged quickly and made it about halfway to the academy before darting behind a cart and hanging back to normal. She had gotten into the habit of turning into Ran every morning, to avoid being caught. Satisfied that no one had noticed, she sprinted to the academy. Iruka was just calling attendance when she burst through the open window. I'm here, she shouted, a grin plastered to her face despite her stomach's attempts to complete a figure 8 inside her. I see that, Naomi, sit down. Iruka sighed. He did care for the girl, he really did, but he wished she would make more of an effort. But nope, as soon as he finished calling attendance he looked at her and she was sleeping soundly. Also, did her face look slightly green? He shook his head to make himself focus before throwing the usual eraser at her head. The thunk was very satisfying. An hour later Naomi again felt that nauseous feeling again. The one that meant either she get to a toilet, or get sick all over her desk. She tried to hold it back, since she knew she would get in trouble and accused of faking if she asked to go to the bathroom. It didn't work. Iruka was just getting into the Nidime's reign when she lost a hold of the apple she'd scarfed down for breakfast all over the aisle. "Naomi, are you sick?" Iruka knew he shouldn't have ignored her coloration. His teacher instincts were screaming obscenities at him for his cruelness of marking the girl tardy when it wasn't her fault since she was ill. Naomi finished chucking and groaned, thumping her head onto the desk and trying to pretend she couldn't taste the foul taste in her mouth. "Come on, school nurse." She didn't fight very hard while Iruka instructed Mizuki to get the janitor to clean the mess up while he took her to the nurse. "Why did you come to school if you were sick?" he questioned her gently as they walked down the hall. "I get in trouble enough for skipping," she pointed out. "It's not skipping if there's a valid reason behind it," he argued. He paused while the girl groaned again and clutched her stomach. "Curse this stupid virus that wouldn't go away. Come on, just a bit farther," he urged her. Naomi sniffed and nodded, following him as best she could while holding her stomach as though trying to stop it from bursting out of her belly. The nurse muttered something under her breath suspiciously like, "Demon girl," before taking her temperature and everything. She looked confused at the results for a moment before performing the test again, with a different thermometer. "Well, she doesn't have a temperature, but her blood pressure is a little low," she told Iruka. "Other than that, she appears healthy enough." The nurse finished. "She should probably go home though." Iruka nodded and took Naomi back to the class to get her things before escorting her home. After all, what if she collapsed on the way home? "You live in the red light district?" Iruka asked, a small blush on his face when he saw a corner girl, or prostitute, waving at him in a provocative manner. "Uh-huh," she answered, leading him nervously to the apartment she owned, not that he knew that. "Thanks for walking me, Iruka-sensei." She said bye and closed the door, not wanting him to know she actually lived in the landlady part of the property. Iruka sighed before turning and heading back to the academy. He'd just have to wait until she was well enough to come to school again. Once certain she was alone, she went straight to the bathroom. She had put it off for way too long, and since the nurse said she shouldn't be sick, that left one option she really didn't want to think about. An hour later, she roused herself from her stupor to henge and to ran and answer the door. The little pink plus sign she shoved into the deepest part of her mind. At the front desk stood a young woman with purple hair and dark eyes, wearing a large coat and a mesh shirt underneath, coupled with light brown skirt and shin guards. She had a Konoha Hite 8 as well. "Welcome, how may I help you?" Ran asked politely, putting away the lady's cool outfit to be thought about later. "I need an apartment," the woman said gruffly, eyeing her with a familiar glint in her eye. This lady was suspicious of her for some reason. Did she see the henge? "Alright, the rent is 20,000 every month. Hold on for a moment while I go get the papers," she said politely, leaving a surprised Anko Mitarashi to go and fetch the contract. Anko blinked at the woman before grinning. She thought for sure it would be at least 70,000 yen because of her reputation. Either this lady was new to Konoha or she was one of those open-minded smart people. Either way, she could get a new apartment since she came back from a mission to find hers burnt to the ground. "Alright, I found them. Just sign the dotted line. You'll have apartment 103 if that's not too much trouble," Ran said upon re-entering. "Got it, and thanks," Anko said with a smile before picking up her mission bag and taking the keys to go and get settled in. "Oh, before I forget. The electricity is still a little iffy. I haven't been able to get it repaired yet," Ran called after her. Anko grunted her understanding, still better than she had expected. Alone again, Ran walked into her office before returning with an "out to lunch" sign. She grabbed a purse she had found in the trash and cleaned up, then left the building to go on an all-important mission. She had to find out from a professional if she was really pregnant. She made the appointment and waited for them to call her back. When they did, she got her blood drawn, as Ran obviously did a pee test, and waited for the good word. "Congratulations Yurichi-san, you're going to have a baby," the doctor reported to her in a half hour. Ran blinked before gathering herself, smiling, and thanking him before paying the hospital and making an appointment for the next month. She'd had to go to the hospital every month in order to make sure the baby was healthy. Through that entire day, she didn't once think of the possibility of an abortion. On her walk home she couldn't wipe away the smile on her face even if she took a rag to her face. She would really be a mommy. Ka-san. Gone was the nervousness, the nausea, and all the other things that had plagued her for the last month. Nope, she was in a good mood and she let the entire village know about it. Ichigo-san was just coming home when he found his landlady Ren smiling to herself over nothing at all. "Did something good happen today, Ren-san?" he asked curiously. She turned to him and smiled. "I'm going to be a mother." On the bright side, at least he didn't drop his groceries. "That's fantastic." He congratulated her. She laughed and thanked him before offering to help him pack his bags, but he declined. She was pregnant and should rest anyway. Naomi studied her reflection in the mirror. She turned to the side and tried to see if she could tell any differences. Unlike yesterday, today she was all frowns and worries. Today is Thursday. She had just realized that if anyone found out it was her, and not Ran, that was pregnant, they might kick her out of the academy. If they didn't, she'd certainly be ridiculed and called some unflattering names for certain. She sighed in relief upon seeing no differences and resolved to buy a very thick jacket or hoodie. At least she could hide the weight gain if she was careful. She couldn't stay in Henge and just miss 9 months of school, she'd flunk out for sure. Which brought another worry to the front of her mind. She had 2 years before she had to graduate. She wouldn't be taking the exam this year since she would still be pregnant, and thus unlikely to pass the fitness test. To graduate, she would need very good grades though, because she had to be 100% certain that she would get her Hite 8. She would need the money from being a shinobi to afford a lot of things for the baby. The doctor visits alone would no doubt keep her in the red until the baby was born. She wouldn't go to the academy today or tomorrow. Nope, she'd be preparing for the baby and looking for a job to help out. Taking a deep breath, she made the now familiar seals and changed into Ran again. Time for job hunting. She decided to stay close to home and started in the entertainment section of the district. Obviously she would not sell her body like the corner girls, after all she had already gotten pregnant. Nope, she went to the bars. "Excuse me bartender-san, are there any vacancies?" she asked politely, trying to sound grown up. The man looked her up and down. His eyes lingered on her belly for a moment, which worried her a little. He nodded before motioning for her to sit down. When she left, she had a job for 5 until midnight every day. Since the academy ended at 3 o'clock, that meant she'd have 2 hours for training unless she started getting up early. She'd be a waitress, and asked to mix drinks and help keep the shinobi who came from getting too rowdy while drunk. She got weekends off unless they paid extra. The alcohol made her feel a little lightheaded, but at least she hadn't gotten sick at all during the short interview. She really did love the red light district. No one asked questions, no one looked at you twice, and so long as you didn't piss anyone off they treated you with a sort of passive respect. Naomi decided to get used to early mornings and set her alarm for 5 in the morning. The academy started every day at 8, so that would give 3 hours for training, 2 for homework in the afternoon. Yep, Naomi Uzumaki had decided she would actively do her homework and study so she could bring her grades up out of the mud and the muck. She admitted to being exhausted the next night, as she was forced to retire to bed at midnight, but she figured eventually she would get used to it. She left the alarm clock off that night, since she had no school or work or anything. Tomorrow would be for training. The next morning at 10 Naomi stood in a clearing with her kunai, practicing her throwing techniques. She had to hit the targets. She had to. By the end of the hour, she at least got within the outer range, but there was still room for improvement. She went back to the apartment and took a shower before hanging and going to a bookstore. She would need some books on babies and taking care of them. Ran got to the store all right and went to the section she thought would have information on babies and stuff. Soon she came up with a book titled What to Expect When You're Expecting. Smiling, she also got a book of baby names before buying both and leaving. Rather than read though, she went to the same training area from before and got to work on her taijutsu conditioning. Push-ups, laps, punches and kicks, those kinds of things. When she finished that, she immediately set out to work on her taijutsu stances from the academy. Taijutsu was the only thing she was instantly good at in the academy. Girl or not, whenever someone stepped into the ring with her she gave them a few bruises. She was right under Kiba, who was under Sasuke. She was right above a girl with white eyes, who now that she thought about it, was named Hinata or something. After that, she again took out her training kunai and shuriken for aim practice. She had to start hitting the targets more often. After a few hours, she finally decided it was time for dinner and chose to go to Ichiraku's. Instant ramen was all well and good, but she missed the warm homemade broth of the Ichiraku duo. Come to think of it, I haven't been sick all day. Maybe I can go to the academy on Monday, she said suddenly, a grin spreading. Wait till she showed everyone how much better she got over the weekend. She'd show them. No more goofing off for her, no siree. She was going to be serious. After dinner and a long tale about her absence from the stand, Naomi hanged and walked out of an alley to go clothes shopping. Orange t-shirts and white shorts were good for attracting attention, but shinobi were supposed to be able to hide and be all stealthy. Besides, she still needed that jacket. Hello customer-san. Are you looking for something for your son? Why would she go to the girls' aisle? It was full of frilly and pink stuff and dresses. Hi, he's studying to be a shinobi but he tore his clothes training. She lied instantly. It would be better not to correct the lady. People tended to make up stories about someone's life from what they gathered, and setting them straight would only take more time and effort than she had the energy to expend. She was sleepy since she didn't get a whole lot of sleep last night. I need a good thick hoodie, preferably a dark gray, and some black shorts. Eventually she also bought some elbow-length fingerless gloves that she bet would make her look badass. Is there anything else you need? The man asked her. I think he mentioned something about practice equipment. Hey, this would be a good way for her to not get overpriced on her weapons. Not to mention she was in the mood to do a little shopping anyway. All girls are at some point. The man rung up her purchases, and again she was both pleasantly surprised and pissed that the prices were so much lower than if she came as herself. Bastards overpricing innocent orphans. Thank you cashier-san, she said politely before leaving with her new things. Now even when she started to really gain weight she had a way to hide it. Perfect. 2 months later, Ran heaved a sigh and rubbed her finally extending belly as she bid goodbye to the workers who had just finished repairing the wires that made the electricity so unpredictable. Now she wouldn't have to worry about the fridge going on the blink and her milk going sour. Now that the sickness had finally abated, she found herself much more energetic, with a craving for dango of all things. While she didn't eat ramen as much as she did, it was still her favorite food. Well, if not for the cravings anyway. The books she bought said that diet was very important for the baby to get all it needed to survive, so she had bought a cookbook and had taught herself more or less how not to burn down apartments. Is that dango? Ran eeped, and turned around to see one of her tenants, Anko, looking at the plate she was eating from. Hi, I've got a bit of a craving for them. Ran answered nervously. Can I have some? Anko asked hopefully. Ran blinked as she finally placed the new glint in the scantily dressed woman's eyes. Dango was to Anko what ramen was to Naomi. Sure, help yourself Anko-san. She nodded. Anko squealed in happiness before taking a stick and promptly eating the wonderful little dumplings. Anko felt a little bad about taking a pregnant woman's food, but the woman obviously wasn't bothered. She had avoided contact with the landlady most of the time, usually only seeing her briefly to pay the rent. She knew from her frankly idiotic neighbor that the woman was 3 months pregnant though. Ichigo-san hasn't been giving you too much trouble, has he? Ran asked curiously. I remember him asking me to kick you out for no reason at all. I never would have thought he would do such a thing. She knew from Ichigo-san about Anko-san's past, but she didn't judge. After all, it was the same thing that happened to her, and she secretly hoped Anko would turn into a friend with time. I'm glad you didn't. Anko said uncomfortably. I have no reason to. You pay the rent and act kind enough. Besides, you remind me of a little girl I know. She said slyly. I do? Anko asked, surprised by that fact. Was there a budding young crazy bitch in the village? Hi, her name's Naomi. This was her test, to see if Anko would be like the rest of the villagers or not. Anko knew that was the name of the Kyubi vessel. She also knew the kid used to live in the same building as her, but when it burned down she stopped seeing the gaki at all. She wondered what happened to the kid. Did she die in the fire? Apparently not, from what this lady was saying. I used to live in the same building as her but never met her. What's she like? She asked over another stick of dango. Ran had a lot of dango, thankfully. She's energetic, kind, and works rather hard at her studies in the academy. Though she only gets C's. Ran said in what she hoped didn't sound like she was laying it thick. Anko humped before finishing the dango she'd been given and saying bye to walk up the stairs to her apartment. Ran sighed again before finishing the remaining dango before heading to work at Takimaru's pub. It was almost 5 already. Hokage office. Hiruzen sighed before puffing out some more smoke from his pipe. He was busy pondering how it was possible that out of the entire village Naomi was the only one able to evade his orb's all-seeing eye. Sometimes he could find her, usually when she was at the academy, but then there was a good part of the day he couldn't find her at all. The orb worked by giving the description of the person he wanted to find. Hence, 10 years old, blonde, blue eyes, and whisker marks, being his search. No such luck. Naomi had either discovered a way to hide from his orb, or the blasted thing was broken. The aged Cage sighed and ran a hand through his beard. This honestly worried him a good deal. Iruka had reported that although she was now always tired in class, her grades had improved tremendously to the middle of the pack. On top of that though, she was tired and he feared that she was doing something that was going to wear her out. Iruka guessed she was training and studying at all hours of the day to keep her grades up now. He wasn't so sure. Perhaps it was high time he snuck from his office to see the young blonde ball of sunshine. Heaven knows it had been too long since he last treated her to a bowl of ramen and listened about her latest prank. Actually, now that he thought about it, she hadn't pulled any pranks either. He found her just when she was leaving the academy, looking a little tired but a little better than he had at first feared. "Naomi-chan, how are you?" he asked kindly. "Hokage-sama." She greeted him politely. She had always been a polite child. He would have preferred it if she called him Gigi every once in a while. He knew he wasn't always able to get away and see her, but they were familiar at least. "Would you like to go for some ramen?" She grinned and nodded eagerly. The number one surefire way to get Naomi Uzumaki into a good mood: offer free ramen. As they walked he sent sidelong glances at her. He knew she had a tomboyish fondness for boys' clothing, but usually the colors were vibrant, full of life. However, it seemed she had taken to wearing dark gray and black. Suitable colors for a shinobi, he knew, but for Naomi they looked boring. Especially when in contrast with her blonde hair, which, he noticed, looked like she had cut it herself with a kunai. He had rather liked her long pigtails, but then he remembered something. Iruka had once told him that there was a rumor that Sasuke, the last loyal Uchiha, had a fondness of long hair and most of the girls had grown their hair out. It seemed that Naomi didn't want to be accidentally confused with a fangirl. "Naomi-chan, what happened to your usual clothing?" he asked once they ordered their ramen. Well, I'm trying to be all serious like a real shinobi," she said simply. The answer didn't ring true to him though, it sounded almost rehearsed. "And shinobi are supposed to be all sneaky in the shadows, right?" He nodded absently and thought deeper on the matter. He couldn't find any reason why she couldn't wear those colors. It had just been a surprise and he had liked her bright clothes. They made it easier to keep track of her. After he paid, holding a silent memorial within his mind for his wallet, they separated. He thought briefly of following her, if only to see her new apartment, but chose against it. My secretary just found out I snuck out senses were tingling. If he wanted to avoid singing castrato, it would be wise to hurry back to his office. Meanwhile, with Naomi, ran. As soon as she couldn't see the Hokage anymore she hanged and ran to her apartment. She only had 30 minutes to get her waitress uniform and get to work now. Curse her ramen addiction. At least he hadn't offered dango, she might still be eating. Ran burst through the pub's door and clocked in. She sighed in relief to see she wasn't late. She had cut it a little close though, and that she would have to make sure didn't happen again. "Get to work, girl." The oh-so-familiar order came. She chuckled and took her tray and little pad and pen to go and take orders. She listened to the music, and gave the dancing girls a quick nod before moving around the tables. "Ran-chan, why don't you get up on those poles?" The men jeered at her. She giggled coyly and wagged a finger in his direction. "You're talking to a pregnant woman, surely I don't have anything you'd want to see." She joked. It was a now familiar routine. Her uniform was simple enough. Obviously it was a little scanty, due to her place of work, but it was conservative enough for a pregnant lady. Takimaru had almost thrown a fit when he found out she was pregnant and immediately tossed this new uniform into her arms. It seemed he didn't want the customers to get any ideas. She finished her shift and clocked out, leaving the disappointed crowd behind on her walk home. As usual, she made it home safe and sound and crashed to sleep right away. The henge vanished, leaving an exhausted academy student. She slept for 5 hours before waking up and going through her morning routine. She had a doctor's appointment today. Normally she scheduled them for the weekend so she wouldn't miss class, but her doctor, Hiroshi, was going on vacation then. Today she'd be finding out if her baby was a boy or a girl. She hoped it was a boy personally. It felt like a boy. If it were a boy she'd name it Hikaru. Well, little man, let's get ready. She yawned, walking to the shower to clean away the muck of last night. As she went to the hospital, dressed in a comfortable kimono that was a little loose in the waist. Her heeled sandals were a dark blue. Her red hair she had done in a ponytail. All in all, one could hardly tell she was a pregnant 10-year-old. She was leaning back in the bed now, watching as Hiroshi-san moved the ultrasound monitor around, trying to get the baby into a position where they could see the gender. Ah, here we go. She looked at the screen but didn't see anything different. Just gray and dark gray blobs all over. It looks like a healthy baby boy, Yurichi-san. Hiroshi informed her. He took pictures and pointed out the male parts to her. All the time, she smiled and kept a single hand resting on her distended stomach. Arigato. She left the hospital carrying the pictures of her new baby boy. She couldn't wait to see what he looked like when he was born. Naomi lay on her couch, having chosen to take the day off from any training, and simply crashed on the couch after getting home. She was busy glaring at the clock on her wall at the moment. She was trying to will the hands on the clock to turn back. She had 30 minutes to get to work. I don't wanna, she whined. It had been so long since she had given herself a lazy day. Since she last acted like the child she was. I'll get fired if I don't go. She finally sighed, hefting herself to her feet and walking out the door, safely in henge. Ran yawned again as she carried yet another round to table 7. It seemed a large group of shinobi were celebrating over something or other. Probably got back from a big mission and were celebrating making it back alive and in success. Ran, no slacking. Takimaru scolded her upon noticing her mouth agape. It was already 11:30, just a bit longer and she could go home. Hi Oyabun, she called back. Oyabun, the honorable title of boss, which he insisted she call him for some strange reason. 20 minutes to go and she would be home free for a good 5 hours of sleep. That sounded abso-fucking-lutely heavenly. She walked home, taking a different path from yesterday, just as she always did. After all, it was always fun going through shortcuts, and Iruka-sensei did say that shinobi falling into patterns could be dangerous. Anyway, she was walking home, as ran of course, when something strange happened. On her way home she noticed a shadow lurking in an alley. She stretched her neck a little and nearly gasped when she saw who it was. Of all the people she could meet in a dark alley, why would Shikamaru Nara be lying there? Forgetting completely about her henge, she rushed over to the boy and looked for anything that would suggest he was hurt. There wasn't any blood, and his clothes weren't ripped or anything. For all intents and purposes, the boy was sleeping. Hey, Shikamaru, wake up! She urged him, shaking his shoulder. Shikamaru's eyes bolted open for a second before relaxing into their usual lazy glow upon seeing a young woman waking him up. What are you doing here all alone at midnight? Ran asked him, seeing he was awake. Troublesome. I got lost on the way back from a restaurant and ended up here and crashed. He explained. Figured I'd wait till morning to try and find my way home. Ran's brows knitted together. On one hand, he wasn't hurt and would be able to get home in the morning light. On the other, it was cold outside and she felt bad about leaving a friend to brave the dark. You come with me to my apartment and spend the night then, you shouldn't sleep in an alley, it's dangerous. She told him. Shikamaru yawned, muttered another, troublesome, and complied. A bed would be better than the ground any day of the week. Ran saw how tired the Nara boy was and found herself wanting to carry him. Despite the fact she herself was exhausted, pregnant, and didn't want to give away her identity on accident. They got to the apartment and she settled him into her own bed and spent the night on the couch, not noticing as her henge dropped and she drifted into a sleep deeper than she usually accomplished. Shikamaru woke up to the sound of a horrid beeping that he couldn't escape from. He eventually managed to slam a hand on the alarm on the nightstand and sighed in relief at the blessed silence. Until he caught sight of the time. Troublesome. Who gets up at 5 in the morning? He then remembered where he was and who had brought him. He groaned again before laying back down. He would deal with it later. For now that lady had given him her bed and he was still tired, so he slept. 3 more hours later he woke up again, this time to more natural causes. Those troublesome birds outside the window were being too loud. He sighed before deciding he should get up and see how the lady was doing. He felt a little troublesome for taking her bed last night. He walked outside the room and stumbled into the living room. He jumped in surprise when he saw his classmate and friend, Naomi, laying down on the cushions of the couch. She was tired, she was snoring, and she was wearing the same clothing as the woman from last night. And she appeared to have put on a little weight. "Hey, Naomi, what are you doing here?" He sighed again when she didn't wake up and began to shake her. This was so troublesome. Naomi eeped when she woke up, something she found she did a lot when startled. Shikamaru's mind was worrying and he didn't like the conclusions he was drawing up. Sometimes, always, being a genius sucked. Ran-san lets me stay here. She's really nice. She lent me her clothes cause mine were all dirty. His first instinct was to accept the explanation. After all, short of inventing a new physical version of the henge jutsu, there was no other explanation. Unfortunately for both of them, he was very good at detecting lies. "Naomi, why not start at the beginning? This is troublesome, but I want to know." Her smile faded slowly and her eyes widened considerably. He was convinced something had happened to his sometimes running buddy now, and his troublesome brain couldn't get away from the subject of her apparent weight gain. "You'll tell," she protested, pouting fiercely. Shikamaru inwardly sighed and muttered something about troublesome women. "What if I promise I won't?" he offered. If it was something directly harmful to her, he knew it was his duty to tell an adult, but he wasn't stupid. He knew that a lot of things must have been happening to Naomi for her to live in the red light district. "How do I know you'll keep your promises?" she asked him in turn. "Because having you come at me with a grudge during sparring at the academy is too troublesome." She nodded at his point but couldn't help but feel sick to her stomach at the thought of telling anyone. She wanted to be a ninja, damn it. They'd kick her out if word got out. "Naomi, I swear on both my clan name and ancestors' pride that I will not tell another living soul what you are about to tell me, troublesome girl." Naomi for a minute could only gasp in surprise. Since she had started forcing herself to pay attention in school, she knew swearing on one's clan and family was serious. "On my birthday, I got raped by some douchebag. A month later, the day I got sick in class, I manned up and took a pregnancy test." Yeah, he really hated his troublesome brain. It was always so troublesome when he was right. "Ran is actually me in disguise, a henge to run this apartment to get paid by the people who live here and get an after-school job." He frowned again, trying to discern the lie. "Henges aren't solid. Naomi, henges aren't solid. You should know better than try to fool someone like that." He had sworn on his clan honor and she still lied to him? "Hey, I'm not lying. What do you mean they aren't solid? Mine have always been solid. Watch." Her hands came together and Ran popped up again, still wearing the uniform. Shikamaru's eyes narrowed and he gingerly poked the stomach of the transformation. His eyebrows shot up to his hairline when his hands didn't pass through it harmlessly. "Naomi Uzumaki doesn't lie when she says she won't," Ran said, sticking a tongue out at the now shorter boy. "Naomi, henges aren't meant to be solid." When she didn't understand, he hanged into another Ran. She poked him in the chest but her hand phased right through. "Whoa, weird." He made her dispel her henge and redo it so he could watch her. The signs were exactly the same, no matter what angle he looked from. How is that possible? He was normally very lazy, as all Nara men were, but they were also all geniuses. To come across something that so clearly made a mockery of everything he knew and confused the heck out of him so much was frustrating. Meanwhile, Naomi had been telling him everything that she'd been doing since her birthday. Shikamaru winced when he remembered that. Being raped had to be the worst birthday present ever, even more so since she was an orphan and the guy was still on the loose. "But if anyone finds out I'm pregnant, they won't let me be a shinobi. They'll kick me out of the academy." Which explained her reluctance to tell him all of this. He knew they weren't particularly close, but they were familiar at least. "Have you thought about what you're going to do after it's born?" He was rather curious to see what she'd do about that actually. Babies required constant care and she couldn't take care of the baby at the academy. Couldn't bring the baby with her either. From the look on her face, obviously she hadn't. What was worse was that now that he knew so much of the situation, he felt inclined to help. What kind of troublesome situations were he being dragged into? He did some quick calculations in his head. He knew now that her birthday was October 10th, that meant the baby would be born in July, about midway. That would be during the summer, so the baby would be almost 2 months before the academy started again. Old enough to be dropped at the nursery from around 7 until 7. Then there was also the problem about the henge. Apparently, anyone who knew about the pregnancy thought it was Ran who was pregnant, and Ran was only a very advanced henge. The question was if Naomi would be able to keep the henge up during labor, and for how long. He asked her if she knew how long she could keep up the henge normally, and she stated that she could keep it up for 7 hours at least but had never pressed farther than that. That was better than he'd expected and explained why she was out as Ran at midnight. Although he still didn't know why she woke up at 5. Naomi, do you go to doctor appointments? He knew that pregnant women had to go to the doctor at least once a month to make sure the baby was okay. He also knew that during these appointments blood was often drawn and ultrasounds used. When she nodded, it opened up some possibilities. I have an idea, but we need more information on your henge and what it can do. That is when they remembered that, unlike Naomi, Shikamaru had a family. A family that was probably worried sick that he had never come home. A family with a very lazy but smart Junin commander and nagging mother. I'm screwed, he groaned. His mother would kill him. He had never made it home last night. Hey Shikamaru, what if I took you home as Ran? The solution was so simple, yet so sweet. The henge couldn't easily be disrupted, from what he knew, and hard to detect since he knew at least one shinobi lived in this building and didn't know. It's the least I can do to repay you for your help. Naomi decided, already making the all too familiar hand signs. Ran changed from her work clothes and put on a green kimono before they headed out. Shikamaru was amazed when he saw how her personality seemed to do a 180 when they stepped into the lobby. Suddenly, Ran was kind, sweet, and quiet. Not troublesome at all and more than happy to help a little lost boy get home. Nay, Shikamaru, how did you get lost anyway? She wanted to ask how he ended up in the red light district since she knew that there were no restaurants in it that let in kids on a regular basis. I was actually trying to get my dad to come home from a bar but got turned around. Ah, that made more sense. The red light district could be confusing for an outsider, especially at night. Not 5 seconds after knocking, an imposing woman answered the door. Ran noted that Shikamaru didn't look much like her except for the bone structure. Shikamaru-chan. Ran was completely bypassed by Yoshino darting forward and pulling her son into a hug. Please come in so I can thank you for bringing my son home safely. Yoshino insisted, having assured herself that Shikamaru hadn't been hurt or caught cold. Well, I found him late last night on my way home from work and took him home with me. Ran explained over tea. Shikamaru was positively stupefied by her act but admitted he was relieved. Naomi was not the kind of girl who his mother got along with, but he wouldn't be surprised to find Ran being invited over for dinner in the near future. I sent him to find his father. I was so worried when his father came home and saying that he never saw him. I thought he'd been hurt. Yoshino sniffled loudly. Ran briefly wondered how she would feel if her future son didn't come home one day. She just as quickly crushed the very idea. The red light district can be dangerous for children. I myself am a little worried about racing my son there. Yoshino's eyes seemed to widen and she looked down comically as though she had just noticed Ran's somewhat roundish figure. How far along are you? Yoshino asked excitedly. 13 weeks actually. I only last week learned he's a boy. Ran answered, more subdued but obviously happy. You live in the red light district? Forgive me for being blunt, but are you married? Ran blushed and she lowered her head slightly before shaking. I was going to be married, but he left. Yoshino cooed sympathetically and comforted the distraught-looking redhead. Shikamaru found himself fighting the urge to gag and wondered if his mother would notice should he leave the room. Do you make enough to support yourself and the child? The Nara woman asked. I should. On top of my job as a waitress, I also own an apartment complex, which brings in extra money. Somehow this topic led to vitamins and about proper weight gain during pregnancy, with Yoshino telling Ran she was much too thin and she should eat more. Which somehow brought the topic to Yoshino running upstairs and bringing down Shikamaru's old baby things. I couldn't possibly. Ran protested when she saw the beautiful, sea blue bassinet. Shikamaru was dying of embarrassment, even though logically he knew it was really just Naomi. I insist. Besides, these are just collecting dust in the attic. When Yoshino finally managed to wear Ran down, he was drafted to help move everything. His father came home just as they were about to leave, and in turn Yoshino drafted him as well. What will it feel like when the baby starts to kick? Does it hurt? Yoshino had forbidden Ran from carrying anything but a diaper bag. She was now taking this opportunity to speak with Yoshino-san about the pregnancy to lay some of her worries to rest. Only nearing the end, the rest of the time it just feels like butterflies in your stomach. The older woman assured her. Shikaku had come home to find his wife befriending an obviously pregnant woman. He knew the minute his gaze landed on her that she was still early in pregnancy, probably late first trimester or early second. He also instantly knew he'd be seeing a lot of the young woman. Yoshino loved children, especially little children, especially when she had a chance to know the mother during pregnancy. His son was strangely quiet, but he figured he would be too. No doubt before Yoshino even had the idea for this furniture move, the two women had been talking about pregnancy and possibly some of Shikamaru's quirks as an infant. He would be as quiet as possible too if their situations were reversed. But since they weren't reversed, he was free to mutter the Nara favorite word as much as he liked since his wife was too busy to smack him. He cast a lazy eye over the apartment they had entered and found it surprisingly clean. Ran didn't seem the type to pay for a maid, so it was likely she did the cleaning herself. He was also surprised to see Anko Mitarashi, who seemed to be waiting for Ran's arrival. "Anko-san, I hope you weren't waiting for me," Ran cried immediately, stepping forward. "Huh? Oh, no, I wasn't. I just wanted to talk to you about my rent for when I leave on extended missions," Anko assured the woman. Ever since their talk, Anko had discreetly made an effort to get to know Ran more. In return, Ran had taken to smiling bigger and speaking a little louder in the dango-loving woman's presence. "So Nara, what are you doing here?" Anko asked the shinobi standing and holding a bassinet. Shikaku groaned, knowing this little meeting would be known halfway around the village by lunchtime. "Yoshino-san was kind enough to give me her son's old things. I think she's even more excited I'm having a boy than I am," Ran joked good-naturedly. After explaining about how Ran had found Shikamaru last night, Anko offered to help set the stuff up and let Ran sit down for a bit. Ran wondered if she should be offended that everyone seemed to think she needed to rest every 5 minutes, no matter if she really was tired from the long walk. Despite her wish to take a short nap, Ran made sure to stay awake. She didn't want to even try keeping the henge up in her sleep, especially with so many people in her apartment. So when Shikamaru came to get her and tell her they'd finished setting up everything in the nursery, she was up and ready to go. On a whim, she had painted the room with blues and greens and browns just 2 weeks ago, before she even knew it was a boy. She found she was actually a pretty good painter too, which was a small bonus. She was glad she had now. The bassinet and changing station matched it perfectly. "It's wonderful, Yoshino-san," she thanked the woman again. She couldn't believe anyone was willing to give her these things. She thought for sure she'd have to buy some herself. "Shikaku-san, Anko-san, Shikamaru-kun, thank you as well for helping me." She bowed respectfully. The Nara family left after getting her to agree to dinner that weekend, leaving Ran and Anko alone. Ran sighed tiredly and sat on her couch, facing the TV she never even used. "If you want, I could make a dango run," Anko offered charitably. Ran jumped at the offer and handed the woman some money to pay for it all, stating that it was only right since Anko helped set everything up. Ran groaned aloud exactly 3 minutes after Anko left and when she was sure no one was around. She dropped the henge and immediately began rubbing her ankles. She usually didn't carry things heavier than a tray of drinks when in henge, and then only for a couple minutes. Who knew it could so exhausting? Obviously henge and work are going to be something I train on for a while. Which reminded Naomi that she hadn't gone to the academy that day. Shit, she transformed just a minute before Anko returned and gratefully accepted the dango. She'd worry about Iruka-sensei tomorrow. She had the rest of the day to cook up an excuse. "If you're tired, we can talk about that deal for my missions tomorrow," Ran, Anko suggested. She could see that Ran was clearly exhausted, although the civilian did a pretty good job hiding it. "No, we may as well talk now, I'll only be tired again tomorrow." Wasn't that the truth? Being pregnant was exhausting. She was always tired, something that she had no understanding of, before the world tipped itself to one side. Well, I've recently passed the Tokubetsu Junin exams, which means that I've made it into the elite. However, the elite also take more important missions. Anko was unused to having to explain such things, but Ran was only a civilian and wouldn't understand otherwise. These missions are higher ranked and can take longer to finish, sometimes over 3 months. I'll be leaving for a 3-month mission in 2 days and I need to make sure that my apartment doesn't get new locks while I'm gone. Anko knew by now that Ran was too nice to change the locks like that if she missed a payment, but missing 3 might be bad. Would you be able to pay when you got back? Ran asked curiously. Anko did the math and knew that her little A ranked would leave her with plenty of money to spare, even after paying for missed rent. Yeah, so would that be an okay deal? Ran nodded and the deal was finished over the remaining dango. Anko left to do whatever it is that new Tokubetsu Junin do in their free time, leaving Ran alone to revert back to Naomi and finally reclaim her bed. Anko considered herself very lucky to have found a woman like Ran as her landlady. Too many people judged her on her connection with Orochimaru and treated her poorly because of it. Ran knew about her past though, and even tried to befriend her. If anybody were asked if they thought Anko and a civilian woman could get along, the answer would have been a resounding no. Here they were though, civilian in Kunoichi and getting along just fine in the small amount of time Anko could spare. Anko even found herself leaving the Forest of Death earlier than normal to go to the bar Ran worked at and check up on her. She had come to think of Ran as a pseudo little sister. Someone she could watch out for and support and who had a streak of craziness but was always polite and less angered. The night Anko had witnessed a drunk man grope Ran, she had seen that the woman obviously wasn't a helpless girl, like she'd first assumed. Nope, when the man grabbed her chest Ran's eyes had narrowed, a smile had crept to her lips, and a hand had come down an arch that just happened to meet his face. That hit hadn't been a slap either, but a full-blown punch with decent strength for a civilian woman. Anko had of course proceeded to make sure the man never thought of coming back to that particular bar again. But she knew Ran wouldn't be taken advantage of during her pregnancy at least. That she cared surprised her, that she didn't care that she cared made her curious. Why was Ran different from the other civilians? Anko decided that Ran's parents had probably been geniuses or something, to have created a girl who was so polite and open-minded. With Naomi felt like crying when she heard knocking on her door. She knew she must have slept, since the clock read 3 instead of 11 like it had earlier. But she felt like she had only just closed her eyes. Come in. She didn't care who it was at this point, she only wanted them to get what they wanted and leave so she could go back to sleep. Finding Shikamaru standing in her bedroom doorway threw that option out the window screaming like a little girl. You're really tired, aren't you? Naomi gave him her best scowl but knew its effect was lessened with half her face smooshed into the pillow. She realized she was laying on her stomach and quickly rolled over. She was worried that laying on her stomach might squish the baby or something. Why are you back already? She asked him after a lengthy yawn. I needed to get away from my mom. He answered. Go ahead and go back to sleep, I'll just take a nap too. He told her. I shouldn't, I got work in 2 hours and it's a 30-minute walk. She really did wish she could sleep some more, but if she did she might oversleep, and missing just 1 day might get her fired. I'll wake you up, troublesome girl. So Naomi took the offered chance to sleep and drifted off quickly. Shikamaru would have chuckled at how quickly Naomi fell asleep if he thought it was worth the effort. As it were, he simply began walking around the apartment. He hadn't come here to escape his mother, like he said. In truth, his mother had sent him here because she thought Ran might need help with something. As he knew the truth behind Ran's identity, he privately agreed. Naomi did need all the help she could get, even though she'd been doing well on her own. She'd been subtle, had hidden the signs, and had developed pretty good acting skills without any help. However, it remained that she was only a kid and pregnant. On his way here he had bought some books on teenage pregnancy. Despite the fact they were only kids, he figured the books would be better than nothing. A lot of the principles were basically the same, like their changing bodies. As it were though, he wasn't looking at them. Nope, he was looking at her wardrobe. Naomi's clothes were usually thick, except for the shorts and tees. She had at least 3 hoodies and 2 jackets, which kept getting thicker, so he assumed these were used to hide her weight gain. Ran's clothes were thinner and obviously maternal. They consisted mostly of stylish kimonos or blouse and skirt outfits. There was also a copy of her uniform, Her other one was probably still in the wash. He went into the kitchen and looked at her food supplies. It looked like she was able to cook basic meals, judging from the open cookbook and some dirty dishes. She was well stocked, she had probably been shopping recently. The nursery now had a bassinet, changing station, and 2 boxes of baby clothes. Before they had come though, it had held a dresser, some baby toys, and a rocking chair. He admired the paint and opened the closet to find painting supplies, which meant Naomi had probably done the painting herself. The living room had a couch, TV, and a little garden of potted plants. Naomi had a talent for gardening, which he never would have guessed. All in all, the apartment was unremarkable. It was tidy, but it looked lived in. The space was open, but it didn't look empty. The walls were bare of pictures, like a normal household, but instead there was splashes of color. Shikamaru wondered if Naomi had walked through her entire house with a paintbrush and merely dabbed at whatever space she felt needed brightening. The colors were bright. Here was some red, there was orange, and he saw in the bathroom that it was mostly a very bright blue. There was a lot of yellow, the living room was mostly green. They weren't covering any specific place either, and each spot looked messy. It looked like Naomi had just thrown globs of paint everywhere. He went into Naomi's room and took a look around. It was the master bedroom of the 3-room apartment. It held a queen-sized bed with patched-up sheets, some purple curtains, a fuzzy orange carpet, a dresser, a vanity with half the mirror missing, and a bookshelf. Shikamaru was pleasantly surprised to see a go-board and wondered if Naomi was any good. He then moved on to the bookshelf to see what sort of things Naomi read. There were some baby books, 1 or 2 cookbooks, a kid's storybook, a photo album that he'd look at later, and a big history book. He looked at the last one the longest. It wasn't a school book, it was too big, but it said clearly Konoha history. He took it out and found that it told more than important names and faces and battles. There were details like reasons the shinobi wars were all started, allies past and present, and important info on the origins of the village clans. It wasn't a history book, it was a fountain of knowledge. Shikamaru looked at the time and saw it was 4:15. He should wake Naomi up now to let her get ready for work. She wouldn't mind if he stayed and read a little though, would she? As it was, Naomi told him he was always welcome so long as he didn't make a habit of going out late. He wasn't sure if she was serious about that or if it was a joke because she looked like an adult as ran. Either way, he knew he'd be heeding her advice regardless. The red light district was dangerous for kids on their own, even academy students. He finished the history book with understanding on a lot of clan traditions that he hadn't had before and decided to look through the photo album since he had spare time before having to go home. On the front of the album were the words family album in formal kanji. He knew Naomi was an orphan, but he wondered if that had always been the case. Were her parents' pictures in here? He opened it but instead found ultrasound pictures. There were pictures of Ran and Naomi respectively. There was even a picture of Naomi lifting up her shirt and admiring her belly in the mirror. It must have been taken a month back or so though, because it looked flat and unremarkable. This wasn't an album of any lost family, it was an album of the family she was starting. He flipped through the rest of the book to see if there were any more pictures, but until the end he didn't find anything. At the back was a poem though, apparently written by Naomi. Tiny movements like tiny kicks. Tiny baby, a mother's bliss. Can't wait to give the tiny you. Huge hugs and lots of kisses too. What tiny dreams you might have now. I would understand someday, somehow. I dreamed last night, your tiny face. An angel indeed, made from God's sweet embrace. How else would mommy know? How much her tiny little angel has grown. How else would mommy guess? If her little angel have some requests? I know that somehow you could now hear. Oh, what a thrill you will bring us here. Now hush my baby, it's time to rest. Inside my womb, your own calm nest. May God help me to keep you safe. And always keep you strong, I pray. I love you right before I planned you. And I love you more now that I have you. The poem wasn't the best written, but he could clearly see Naomi struggling to come up with just the right words. If he told anyone that Naomi would ever write a poem, he'd be sent to the school nurse before he could say troublesome. But after he closed the album and replaced it on the shelf, he wondered what else he didn't know about Naomi Uzumaki. He left and made it home in time for dinner, which they were having at the Akamichi's. His mom wouldn't shut up about the sweet Ran and her little boy she was expecting. Shikamaru knew from the look in Krona Akamichi's eye when Yoshino said Ran was too thin that Naomi would be invited over for dinner very soon. "So this Ran lady let you stay at her place for the night?" Choji asked to be certain. Shikamaru nodded and the boy continued his eating like he'd never spoken. "What's she like?" The question was easy enough to answer, but Shikamaru quickly realized he didn't know. What surprised him though, was that he wanted to. "Quiet, likes gardening, polite, and likes bright colors," he reported loyally. He found himself wanting to say she was a good painter, that she wrote some poetry, and that she obviously loved her baby even though she was only 3 months along. What did he really know though? He stayed overnight at the Akamichi household that night. Krona eventually weaseled out of him that Ran had a craving for dango from what he'd observed before letting them go to bed. "Hey Shika, you were pretty quiet, is something wrong?" Choji asked from his side of the twin bed. Shikamaru opened his eyes to see his best friend looking at him. "Nothing's wrong," he said honestly. Nothing was either. Naomi and the baby seemed healthy enough. Nothing had happened to him in the district. That crazy Junin woman hadn't tried to kill him. "You didn't once look out the window at the clouds all through dinner." Shikamaru realized he'd have to work on his acting if he wanted to keep his promise to Naomi. Still, he found himself wanting to tell Choji, honor be damned. It was only Naomi's face when she'd asked him to promise not to tell that kept him quiet. "I ran into Naomi today, she lives in the red light district." His friend's eyes widened, as though he'd just discovered the secret to the meaning of life. Choji seemed to accept his explanation and drifted off to sleep. Shikamaru took a little longer, but sleep couldn't evade Nara for long. Over the next few days a new routine was established. Naomi slowly started entwining herself into Shikamaru and Choji's lives, almost without even Shikamaru realizing what she was doing. He would need to ask to find out though. After school Shikamaru would inevitably find his way to her apartment, sometimes with Choji and sometimes not, helping with her homework. He would help her try and figure out the absolute limits of Naomi's henge, making her randomly transform into various people and objects. When he found out she could change into things much smaller and larger than her, he nearly had a field day with the number of uses that could have. As expected, an invitation from Yoshino to Ran to meet the Akamichi was delivered soon. That weekend she was invited over and they had dinner together comfortably. Shikamaru introduced Choji to Ran, Yoshino introduced her to Krona. Krona then began trying to make Ran eat her weight in food. "Come now, you're much too thin for 3 months. Help yourself, there's plenty." Ran was again coerced into accepting another plate of food. At least they had finally made it to dessert and this plate had dango on it. Krona and Yoshino had never been ninja, thus they got along well with Ran. Come to think of it, Yuki Yamanaka had never been a ninja either. Ran wondered if she would be meeting Ino's mom soon. "Okay, be honest, did you want a boy or a girl when you first found out?" Yoshino asked. It was after dinner and everyone was sitting in the living room and unwinding. "I immediately wanted a boy, but I do hope to have a girl later on. When I find the right guy." Which for Naomi might be difficult. Especially as her having a kid couldn't stay a secret forever. "Have you thought of names?" Krona asked next, pouring some tea. "I've already decided on the name Hikaru." Ran informed them. For a girl she wasn't so sure, but she liked the name Kuina. Eventually it grew late and Ran bid everyone goodbye. She wasn't aware that Krona had Choza follow her to make sure she got home safely. Luckily, Ran saw the walk home after the long evening the perfect training exercise and didn't dispel her henge. She made it home, took a shower, and went to bed. She'd had a long Saturday and was ready for a nice long sleep. 3 months later, Naomi decided there wasn't enough hours in the day. She worked herself to the bone in the morning at 5 until 7:30, ate breakfast, then sat through the academy, then homework for 2 hours, then work from 5 till midnight. This left 5 blissful hours of sleep, which were a good 5 hours too few. Naomi came to this conclusion whilst sitting in class through a long lecture about the many shinobi disciplines. She shook her head and made herself focus. Who knows, maybe she'd learn something to help her. Yet another example of a discipline requiring a lot of study is fuinjutsu. Naomi looked up in interest. Sealing arts? Like storage scrolls and exploding tags? The extra studying she'd have to dedicate to that almost put her off entirely. She already had too few hours of sleep as it was. Naomi watched as Iruka showed some of the students some of the uses for seals, like barriers and intruder detector seals. Things she could definitely use. Naomi groaned and let her head fall onto the table in front of her. She was 24 weeks pregnant and tired. She thought it was bad before, but at least then she'd been able to walk for a good while before tiring out. Naomi Uzumaki, wake up. Her head shot up and she felt her eyes prickling. She'd started experiencing the mood swings she had read about. She knew she had to get it under control or she would start crying in front of everybody. Wake, she assured him sleepily, not helping matters. Her schedule was really starting to kill her, she needed a break. If only she could just go on vacation or something. She knew that wouldn't happen though, she still had a month of school left. Iruka sighed in annoyance before returning to his teaching duties. Naomi was really starting to worry him. She was even more tired than usual and rings were appearing around her eyes. Her grades had taken another jump forward in the last couple months too. He wondered if she was training for even longer now because it didn't look like she was sleeping. Maybe you should slow down on your morning training, Shikamaru suggested during lunch. He had told Choji to go on outside without him while he spoke to Naomi. He still hadn't told his friend, but he was wondering how long it would be until the big boy found out for himself and if their friendship could survive it. You're 6 months along, so obviously it only hurts more to practice now. You might force yourself into labor prematurely. He whispered into her ear, making sure no one could hear them. It was an underhanded trick, but bringing the baby into the argument usually made Naomi do whatever it was he wanted her to. She balked at the mere thought of endangering her baby boy. Shikamaru knew that boy would be the most protected and watched over in the entire fire country, maybe the world. Maybe I should cut down a bit, Naomi mumbled self-consciously. She had always known that her kind of training wasn't the most beneficial, but just halting in her regimen made her boil. She found she liked being in the upper echelons of the class, and she was afraid slacking off now would ruin that. At the same time, she knew her most recent scores had started suffering from overworking herself. It was definitely time to cut back and relax. Naomi suddenly winced, as a particularly strong kick seemed to knock the air from her lungs. Oh yeah, her little boy was definitely going to be a strong taijutsu user. Shikamaru had never felt the baby kicking, but he'd often seen Naomi or Ran wince at the baby's movements. Sometimes he wanted to ask, but it didn't feel right. He wasn't the baby's father, he wasn't his uncle. It didn't feel right to ask to be let into that little world. Naomi inwardly sighed as she saw Shikamaru's gaze linger on her belly. She knew he wanted to feel, but he never asked. She wondered if he felt embarrassed about asking. She then decided she didn't care and she wanted Shikamaru to feel her son. Shikamaru's mouth opened in an attempt to protest when Naomi took his hand but froze when it was placed on her stomach. Naomi had lifted up the hoodie, leaving her belly covered in only a white tee and the bump clearly showing. Shikamaru tensed when he felt something flutter beneath his hand. The baby was kicking, and he was feeling it. He opened and closed his mouth, trying to think of something, anything, to say but came up blank. Woo, I think Hikaru is trying to show off for you. Naomi grunted. As soon as Shika's hand had landed, the little boy was a flurry of movements. She wondered if he knew that it was Shikamaru's hand, then decided he probably did. Shikamaru regained his wits and eventually lifted his hand to go join Choji. Naomi stayed inside and slept through lunch and recess, just like she always did lately. Or at least, that was her intention. What were you and Shikamaru talking about? Naomi nearly burst into tears there and then when she heard the voice of Ino Yamanaka directly above her. Why did people always come when she was trying to sleep? Did they enjoy tormenting her? Was it a conspiracy? Why wouldn't they let her sleep? He was in here an awful long time. Oh, and apparently Sakura was tagging along too. This day just kept getting better and better. And you've been acting weird for weeks now. Ino again, slightly louder and helping to nurture a headache Naomi hadn't noticed until then. Yeah, you finally decide to get serious and then you can't keep your eyes open in class. Sakura, even louder than Ino. They better not start a screeching contest right beside her or there would be hell to pay and she would demand currency and blood. So start spilling. Kami, kill me now. Naomi wished she could just sleep. She needed sleep. If she didn't get sleep soon one of the three of them wouldn't walk out of this room. Naomi had to almost physically stop herself for reaching for a training kunai when Sakura spoke again. You know you're only 10 years old, right? So you shouldn't be lifting up your shirt and letting him cop a feel. Naomi instantly lifted her head and gave the deadliest glare of her life. Sakura and Ino both backed a step and seemed to freeze, they couldn't even breathe. Naomi would later realize she had used killer intent for the first time in her life. That you would even suggest that makes me sick. She stood up, unable to just sit still with all this hormonal rage boiling inside her. Her son seemed to sense what was happening and she could swear she felt him curling deeper into her for protection. If I hear anything like that from you or anyone else in this academy, you know who I'll blame. Spread a rumor like that and expect hell. Now leave me the fuck alone so I can fucking sleep. Naomi, until now, had never soared at school. Sakura and Ino ran from her like the devil was at their heels. Instantly all her anger turned to fear. What if they told someone? What if she got into trouble for threatening them like that? What if Shikamaru had heard that? He might decide it was less troublesome to distance himself from her. Naomi sat down helplessly and shot a furtive glance at the clock on the wall. She still had 30 minutes before anyone came back from lunch. Naomi Uzumaki laid one hand on her stomach, stuffed a fist in her mouth, and cried. After running, Sakura and Ino sat in the shade of the building to try and shake away their lingering panic. Sakura and Ino both competed in book smarts and both realized they had just felt raw ki, something most genin never managed. I never meant to say that. Sakura knew she had crossed a line. Ino and her may have been rivals, but they both still came together when a juicy secret surfaced. When they witnessed a scene of what looked like Shikamaru feeling Naomi up through the window, they had immediately jumped to conclusions. This one being that the two were secretly dating. God, I feel so bad. She looked like she was going to cry. Ino hated it when people cried around her. It was part of the reason she had first befriended Sakura, because the pink cat was always crying. We jumped to conclusions. He was probably just looking at something in her lap. Sakura whimpered, remembering the utterly hateful look they had been on the receiving end of. She definitely hates us now. Ino wasn't sure how she felt about that. She knew many kids were jealous of her brilliant good looks, but she wasn't sure about people hating her. Naomi had every reason to hate her too. Both knew they had to go back in there for class. Both knew they had to apologize. Both knew it had to be done in front of the entire class if they wanted Naomi to know they meant it. Both dreaded it at the same time. They wished the bell would ring. Naomi was sitting in the same place, although her head was down and her tears dried. She hadn't lifted her head when she heard kids enter the class. She hadn't until she heard them whispering and practically felt them pointing at her. Hesitantly, she lifted her head to see Ino and Sakura standing in front of her desk. A surge of panic ripped through her and she knew that they were about to tell everyone about her threatening them. She'd get detention for so long she wouldn't remember what freedom tasted like. Naomi, we're sorry. Sakura stated it loudly for the whole class to hear. Naomi opened and closed her mouth before settling on putting a confused expression on her face. We shouldn't have said that about you. You didn't deserve it. Both girls bowed. Naomi knew from those silly diplomacy lessons that the girls would stay there until she acknowledged their apology. It's okay, I guess. I overreacted. I should have explained what you really saw. By now the entire class was confused. We want to make up for it, so we're taking you shopping. Naomi straightened up and instantly turned to her left, where Shikamaru was now looking at her. They both knew clothes shopping would mean changing rooms, which meant taking off her extremely thick hoodie. Well, I'd love to, but I got a thing that I gotta do. With Shikamaru. She looked at him helplessly, unused the amount of attention she was getting. The only experience she had with something like this was with Yoshino, Krona, and Yuki, and that was when they knew she was pregnant. You do? Ino squealed. She knew those two were closer than they looked. Shikamaru thankfully took the cue to save Naomi's bacon. We were going out for ramen. He yawned, acting less than interested. I knew you two were dating. Iruka looked like he wanted to say something. Probably tell them to sit down, but he was also interested in Naomi's strange behavior. Was her strange tiredness just a side effect of puberty? Naomi's blushing didn't help the whispers starting to spread. How did she get herself into this mess? Why was she blushing? What was worse, was that she found the idea of dating Shikamaru perfectly fine. We're not dating. It's just ramen. She never thought she would say such a thing about the holy noodles, but desperate times took desperate measures. Besides, Shikamaru looked like he liked the idea even less than she did. Oh really, so what exactly was he doing hovering over you during lunch? Ino asked coyly. Naomi invented new shades of red that would make Hinata jealous. He was. You see we were only, help me out here Shika. She wanted to cry again. That's how much she was enjoying this. I only wanted to look at a book she had in her lap. Shikamaru said lamely, feeling about the same as her. Out of the corner of his eye he saw Choji trying to hold in his Snickers. The traitor. Shiri, we completely understand Shikamaru. You were just looking at a book, something Naomi's never touched willingly. Ino purred. She loved teasing people and Naomi and Shika were such good targets. This was better than she had imagined. Iruka-sensei, don't you have something to say about the village economy or something? Naomi turned to her teacher in desperation, a lecture, anything, to escape everyone's looks. Iruka came out of his self-induced trance and told everyone to sit down and be quiet rather professionally for someone who felt like he was watching a drama unfold. Naomi visibly slumped in her chair for relief. That was way too close, but now she had a ramen date with Shikamaru. How did she get herself into these messes? Shikamaru meanwhile had finally managed to put the pieces together and realized what must have happened. The girls had seen him feel the baby but hadn't had a good enough view to see Naomi's extended stomach and had drawn conclusions that brought pink to his cheeks. They had confronted Naomi about it and must have said something very offensive because they had even apologized in front of the entire class to make amends. They had then offered a shopping trip and knowing that shopping meant changing clothes, he had been forced to intervene to help protect Naomi's secret. Which brought them full circle to the date. Shikamaru studied Naomi and decided he could live through one troublesome date. Naomi wasn't as troublesome as Ino when you got to know her. She was pleasing to the eye but not in your face beautiful, she was nice, liked gardening, painting, and poetry. He could do worse, he decided. Besides, they weren't really dating, this was just a trick to get Ino and Sakura off their shopping trip idea for now. School ended and Naomi and Shikamaru headed to Ichiraku's ramen. Naomi was of mixed feelings. On one hand, everyone else thought this was a date, on the other hand it was ramen. I think we're being followed. Naomi whispered suddenly. She wouldn't have caught it normally but all her sneaking around as Ran had given her practice at feeling others' eyes on her. Shikamaru nodded, he felt them too. It seemed Ino and Sakura wanted to watch their little date. We're going to have to play along. Shikamaru whispered back. They didn't want their bluff being called and all. You've been cultivating a lavatera plant, haven't you? You said they aren't native to this climate, so how is it going? He asked louder, just enough so their audience could hear. Pretty good actually. I've just begun pruning it and the shoots are sprouting like mad. They'll start blooming in a couple weeks. She said excitedly, happy to talk about her plans. On the top of her apartment building was an old garden that she had immediately fixed up and put to work as soon as winter was over. She loved doing her homework around a multitude of flowers. You know Ino's parents own a flower shop, you should go there sometime. Shikamaru advised her. She did go there as Ran, but they tried to make sure Naomi went to places Ran did so that both identities could have information and not be seen as suspicious. I was thinking about it cause I passed by there the other day. I really need some more pots and fertilizer. He resisted the urge to smirk with mirth as Naomi almost walked past Ichiraku's in her detailed list of things she needed. Ah, Naomi-chan, Shikamaru-kun. Ayame greeted them happily, already helping her father get their usual orders ready. They often came here after school, although usually with Choji too. You two here by yourselves? So did Shikamaru finally ask you out, Naomi-chan? Naomi got a betrayed look on her face and invented an interesting shade of red. Shikamaru wondered briefly if Hinata had been giving her blushing lessons. Well, it's not really a date. Naomi protested weakly. Why was everyone suddenly hooked onto the idea that they were dating? Couldn't two opposite gender friends go out for ramen anymore? Why are my girls growing up so fast? Tucci sighed. Ayame is almost a woman and now my little Naomi-chan is bringing boys to the stand. Naomi groaned and her head hit the counter with a thump. Oh, by the way Shikamaru, if you're going to date my little Naomi-chan I have to give you the father spiel. Shikamaru invented a new shade of pasty white. Naomi chuckled as Tucci lectured him on treating her like a beautiful, strong, independent princesses. They left the ramen shack and decided to go to the Yamanaka flower shop, since neither felt like doing homework would be good date material. "Ohio, Yamanaka-san," Shikamaru called politely when they walked through the front door. "Hello Shikamaru-kun. Do you know where Ino is? She's meant to be running the register." Yuki returned politely. "She's been following this since school ended," Naomi informed the woman. She could see the stress instantly fade from the woman to be replaced by relief. She made a note to always make sure she knew where Hikaru-chan was so she wouldn't always be worried. "Well, is there anything I can do for you?" Yuki asked kindly. Yuki was one of the few adults who gave Naomi the benefit of the doubt, so she always tried to make a good first impression with these kind of people. "Hi, I need some pots and fertilizer for my little garden," she said. After collecting their purchases and managing to coerce Shika into carrying the heavy bag of fertilizer, they left for her apartment. Naomi gave a huge yawn as she realized how tired she was now. She felt better than she had earlier. Ramen usually did that, but now she was exhausted from carrying the pots and they weren't even in the red light district yet. "Want to take a break?" Shikamaru asked her, nodding his head in direction of the park they were approaching. "Yeah, but only for a little while. I got work in an hour." Naomi insisted quietly, not wanting their tag-alongs to hear. "That old man works you too hard." Shikamaru had met Takimaru and could honestly say the man rubbed him the wrong way. "Takimaru's okay once you get to know him. Besides, if not for him I'd be out of a job and out of luck. Doctor's appointments are expensive," Naomi reminded him. "We should get moving I guess, even though it's troublesome. If you're late you might be fired." Shikamaru thought about complaining about the heavy bag but decided against it. The pots were heavier and Naomi was pregnant and she wasn't complaining. They made it with just a few minutes to spare. Naomi hanged into Ran and changed into her uniform before heading off, leaving Shikamaru to either lounge in her apartment or go find Choji. Remembering how his friend had betrayed him earlier, he chose lounging about today. Naomi's apartment had changed a bit in the last 3 months. The walls were all painted now and covered in paintings that she had done herself. The paintings themselves were varied. Most were of buildings like the academy, the mountains, Ichiraku's, and the Hokage tower. Each painting was shaded differently, like she'd been feeling something different when finishing each one. The one for the monuments was bright and had the sun angled just to show the Yondaime in a bright light and managing to shadow the other 3 faces. Naomi did hold the Yondaime in higher regard, he was her hero. The one for the academy was slightly darker. Whether this was shadowing of the building's purpose to train little assassins or simply because Naomi hated school, he didn't know. All the paintings were styled highlighting a seemingly small part of the subject, but somehow drawing your attention to that place until you realized how important it was to the picture as a whole. In her bedroom were portraits. There was one of him and Naomi at the park and playing. In this picture Naomi looked slightly younger and she wasn't pregnant, she wasn't even wearing a jacket although the leaves in the trees were orange and red. Shikamaru was laying on the slide and looked like he was cloud gazing. Naomi though was swinging with a big grin on her face. Shikamaru's brows came together and he looked closer at the picture. In the background, hidden from immediate view, were the monument heads. Naomi's face was positioned so it looked like her face was in the place the Godaime's head would be carved. He smirked when he saw that and wondered if anyone else had seen the irony or if it was just him so far. In her room were her easel and paints, the Go board that they sometimes played at, the bookshelf, and on the vanity there was makeup. The bookshelf had some new additions, like some parenting books, a novel that she had fallen in love with, a book on jutsu theories which he'd provided, and some more advanced cookbooks. More color had been added as well. The roof of the room had been painted like the sky, with a couple clouds and everything. A sill pot was sitting on the window with some tulips budding and a couple getting ready to bloom. Shikamaru thought it looked very homey. Having finished having a look around, he decided to claim Naomi's bed until he had to go home. His mother was all too troublesome about him being out late now. Next day, 6 in the morning. Naomi slammed a fist on the alarm next to her bed and let her feet carry her to the bathroom without even opening her eyes. She had decided 2 hours with one dedicated to physical training and the other to chakra would be less dangerous than 2 physical hours and 1 chakra hour. At her training ground she did her stretches and started her laps. She was near the top of her class in strength training even though she was secretly pregnant. The only ones who could beat her were Kiba and Sasuke, and she made both of them really work for it. She sometimes won against Kiba, simply because she could outlast him, but that wasn't often. Who knew protecting your stomach could make it so hard to win a spar? After her lapse she did punches and kicks, working at the same tree she'd been working at for the past half a year. It was really getting worn down now. When she finished that she moved to push-ups, curl-ups, and one-handed chin-ups. While she didn't always win her spars, she was at the top of the class when it came to brute strength. She wondered if carrying the baby as extra weight helped. No one could beat her at arm wrestling, even though Sasuke made it a point to try at least once a week. When the hour was over she settled down to work on her chakra. Shikamaru had given her suggestions to help her out with the Bunshin Jutsu, which she had a lot of problems with. No matter how much chakra she used, she couldn't make the clones come out. At least not without them looking dead. So he had suggested chakra control exercises. It turned out that leaf exercise Iruka-sensei sometimes made her do as punishment was useful for something after all. She had gotten to a point where she could have 50 leaves on her arms and head and spin them round and round without any falling. It was while she was doing this that she had an epiphany. Although what surprised her the most was that she knew that word at all. What if instead of making something stick to her, she stuck to something? An image of her walking around on her ceiling came to mind. That would be the abso-fucking-lutely coolest thing ever. She hopped up, making the leaves fall from their various perches, and faced another tree. This was totally doable and she was determined to do it. She bet everybody would be so jealous when she showed it off in class. Apparently the baby was eager for her to try too, since he was kicking her harder than usual now. He felt really excited. Naomi made an effort to calm herself down before she began molding her chakra. She knew that if she let her stupid hormonal mood swings win she wouldn't be able to focus her chakra at all. She focused completely on the tree, she had to concentrate. Naomi opened her eyes and put one foot on the tree. It stuck. She added her other foot, a little higher than the first, and was fully horizontal. Pushing away the thoughts of possibly hurting the baby by falling, she took another step forward. She was shaky and she sometimes slipped a little, but overall she thought she had done pretty well for a first time. She did fall a couple times, but she always made sure to land in a way the baby wouldn't be accidentally hurt. She grabbed an apple from home before heading to the academy, her mind abuzz with possibilities. During class they again spoke briefly about Fuinjutsu and its many uses. Yondaime-sama had been a Fuinjutsu master. Of course, this made her want to study it even more, but she simply didn't have the time. It would have to wait until she had a slightly less busy schedule. Working a good 19 hours a day didn't leave much free time. Now then, it's time for sparring. Let's go to the dojo. Naomi smiled when she heard that. She loved sparring. Being able to learn by beating on people and being beaten on, there was nothing better. Today she was put with Hinata as a partner. She thought Hinata was kind of weird cause she was so quiet, but she guessed she was shy. After all, she had Ran be quiet and shy too, and Hinata and Ran acted pretty much the same. Naomi's academy taijutsu sucked, but she didn't really use it. She let her body move on instinct, letting each blow slide into the next as she pivoted back and forth against her opponent. This method worked pretty well with Kiba and Sasuke, who preferred head-on taijutsu like her. Against Hinata though she changed tactics. Hinata was smaller than her and not as strong, however she used her clan taijutsu the Jukin. With it Hinata could completely shut her down with just a few hits, and getting hit with little needles of chakra hurt. What was worse was that Hinata liked aiming for the stomach. So whenever Naomi fought her, she made sure to keep out of reach to try and tire the Hyuga heiress out. She'd go in for a hit if she thought she could, but she tended to stay moving as much as possible. Especially since she knew the Byakugan could see through things, which meant Hinata might see the baby. She knew that all living things had chakra, and she knew that even babies inside their moms' tummies had chakra, which meant the Byakugan could see them. Whenever she fought with Hinata she made sure to try and channel chakra to augment her moves. Not only did this make her faster and stronger, but it distracted Hinata from looking too closely at her torso. The fight ended quickly enough when Naomi got behind Hinata and kicked her off balance before sitting down on her. In that position it was difficult at best to get any leverage to displace your opponent. Winner, Naomi Uzumaki. Iruka announced after seeing Hinata couldn't displace her. Shikamaru as usual forfeited his match against some nameless student. He never even tried, even though she knew he was decent at the taijutsu. He was just too lazy and called it troublesome. Contrary to popular belief, Naomi was serious about everything she encountered. Whether or not she showed that depended on the situation. She was serious far more often as Ran than she was as Naomi though. Sometimes she worried about that. Creating a mask could be tricky. There was a risk that the act could take a life of its own, and that was happening a little too fast for Naomi's liking. Ran had a job, friends, and responsibilities. Naomi had the academy and she could only spend so much time there. She wasn't too worried though because Ran was just a part of her she didn't show normally. The part that actively painted and read, the part that could spend hours in her garden, the part that was less sure of herself. It wasn't a part she showed at the academy for a couple of reasons. The first being that at any sign of weakness she could be brought down. Naomi winced as she felt a particularly powerful kick. Hikaru was going to be one hell of a shinobi someday. Shikamaru sent her a side glance but didn't make any other sign that he had noticed. He had never felt the baby kick, even though he wanted to. Naomi yawned as she tried to stay awake to Iruka-sensei's lecture. She was exhausted because of her long hours at Takimaru's. It couldn't be HLPED though, she had asked for the job and was loath to quit now. She had to admit though, something had to give soon, and if it wasn't the job, it would be her. Shikamaru shot yet another glance at Naomi. Part of him wondered if it was because she kept almost falling asleep. Another wondered if it was because he was looking for a chance to place his hand on her stomach without anyone noticing. Least of all her. Troublesome, but he guessed it was fine so long as he was careful not to be caught looking. That might raise questions. Remember class, next Wednesday after school we have a guest speaker from the T&I department to introduce you to interrogation techniques. Naomi looked up from her notebook to see Iruka-sensei standing at the front of the class with his usual kindly smile. She thought that it sounded pretty cool, but the problem was the lecture would last for a whole hour. It was a long walk from the academy to her apartment and then all the way to Takimaru's. Unless she got some time off or quit, there wasn't any way she could make the lecture. Naomi waited until lunch to let her head hit the desk and could have cried without shame when her son decided to start kicked her again. Didn't he realize that Ka-chan needed to sleep? Lucky Gaki got to be carried everywhere but she couldn't take a nap? You're overworking yourself. Naomi tipped her head over to be able to look at Shikamaru. He was standing over her with this look in his eye. He was worried about her. I think I'm going to quit Takimaru's. She mumbled tiredly. The only reason she hadn't had a breakdown was because of her legendary hyperactivity. If she wasn't naturally hyper she'd have collapsed long before now. Probably for the best, troublesome girl. Naomi wondered if that word troublesome was some kind of verbal tic for the Nara. His father said it a lot too, as did the other few Nara she had met. Even Yoshino had taken to the word. If she hung out around Shika for long enough would she start saying troublesome all the time? She winced at a particularly strong kick to her bladder and wished she hadn't had that extra glass of OJ. Out of the corner of her eye she could see Shikamaru staring at her belly. She knew that the lazy boy wanted to feel the kicking, but he never asked. Shika, we already got caught once, you may as well feel if you want to. She sighed, sitting up and leaning back in her chair to look out the window. No nosy fangirls to spy on them today, good. He muttered something again but obediently felt the little ball of happy curled inside her body. He had noticed that Hikaru was always pretty active and he took this as a good sign. The problem wasn't that the baby was active, except that it was. Naomi was 10 but by all appearances Hikaru was the healthiest fetus in the world. It didn't make sense but he had a couple theories. Naomi had a lot of chakra. Chakra was the source of life. It was very possible that the baby was feeding off of more than Naomi's nutrients. Maybe the baby was siphoning off her chakra to enhance itself to survive the pregnancy. It would explain why she was so tired all the time, which was unusual, even for a pregnant woman. Come outside and nap, it's a good day outside and Choji will give you some chips. He said to her. Normally, the lazy boy wouldn't have bothered. Where Naomi wanted to nap was no business of his. He justified himself by saying that the desks weren't good places to nap when grass was an option. Fine, but if someone wakes me up before the bell I reserve all rights to hurt you during sparring. He smirked and they decided to just hop through a window. Doors took too long. Luckily for Shikamaru, they were left alone to enjoy the peace. They were the last to get back to class and were surprised when they found only 3 seats available. All in different corners of the room. Ever since Naomi had established herself into their group, the 3 of them had sat together. Shikamaru in the middle, Choji on the right, and Naomi on the left. Now they had to sit apart. Naomi shrugged and headed for the window seat. If she wasn't sitting with friends, she was at least going to sit at a place with a view. That seat happened to be next to someone she didn't associate with though, someone she honestly disliked. Stupid Sasuke Uchiha choosing to sit in the middle of that row right next to the window seat she wanted. She didn't want to ask the Teme to move over, as it would earn the ire of the pink-haired fangirl sitting next to him and drooling, so she decided to just hop over the desk. She vaulted herself over the desk and landed neatly into the chair on the other side. Sasuke normally didn't pay attention to Naomi. She used to be the dead last of the class but had suddenly jumped ahead in grades. This wasn't simple improvement in the aspects being taught, or a change in curriculum. This was what happened when someone decided to try. Naomi Uzumaki had been playing the loser, the only question was why. It had started 6 months ago, in the middle of November when he looked at the class rankings. Naomi was in the middle rather than the last, overtaking almost all the civilian children. She had stayed there for 3 months and then took a leap up again, to the top 10. Actually, it was more accurate to say she was in the top 5. She wasn't loud and didn't wear bright colors anymore, and she looked tired, like she didn't get a lot of sleep. Was she training at all hours of the day? Was she serious now? Maybe the Dobby thing had been an act and now she had let the mask slip. Sasuke didn't like when unexpected things happened. He didn't like it, but he could always count on the fangirls screeching at him. He could count on Iruka-sensei always lecturing, and he used to be able to count on Naomi wearing orange. Now she was an enigma he couldn't figure out, a mystery novel with the end ripped out. When she sat down next to him, he took a long look as she vaulted over the desk and into the seat beside him. Her hair had grown out again, it reached just past her shoulder blades. Today she was wearing a dark brown hoodie and she couldn't seem to decide if she wanted the hood up or down yet. He knew she had gained some weight, but he didn't think it was that big a deal. It wasn't even a big difference, she was nowhere near Choji's weight. She was a little thicker around the middle, but that could just as easily be muscle as fat. Iruka was going on about the other big 5, but he figured he knew enough about them that he didn't listen. Naomi wasn't listening either. She was looking out the window with an indecipherable expression on her face, nothing like her old, big grins, or her newer bored looks. He turned back to face the class, and never saw Naomi roll her eyes in his direction. Yeah, she had noticed him ogling her. It figured that she was the only girl he deigned to acknowledge. All the other girls he ignored. He used to ignore her too, but after she got pregnant he was suddenly very interested in her, though he hadn't done or said anything yet. She wondered sometimes if he might know about the baby, then she'd laugh because nobody but Shikamaru had figured it out, and if she had her way no one else would. He was probably wondering if she was trying to grow her hair out for him. Which reminded her, she needed to cut her hair again. Alright class, time for shuriken practice. Mizuki-sensei announced. She didn't like Mizuki-sensei, he just gave her this bad feeling. She tended to trust her instincts. Naomi joined the girls' side of the training field they were using. Classes like these were always separated by gender, the girls on one side and the boys on another. Boys were drilled more in physical exercises and girls more in throwing exercises. This was all under the assumption that all girls were for support and all guys were meant for the front lines. Naomi always thought there was no greater pleasure than doing something everyone else said was impossible. Her throwing skills were second to only Sasuke Uchiha, something she took as a personal insult. These stationary targets were so boring, and all it took was a flick of her wrists, rather than the swinging of her entire arm like the Uchiha and just about everyone else. In fact, the only one who threw like she did was Shikamaru, and his reason was to conserve energy rather than for efficiency. When she finished her work she sat in the shade with Shikamaru, who had also finished. This was just another day at the academy. Nothing to make it stick out from all the others. That is until she began to feel regular pains in her cervix. Naomi swallowed the lunch that had started swimming upstream and timed the pains. She kept her face as neutral as possible as she timed that they were about 10 minutes apart, each. Her face was probably pale, not that she had a mirror to check. She took a deep breath and shifted a little in her seat. They were in the middle of science class, where they were learning the effects of mixing chemicals to make poisons and antidotes. She had to relax and hope they went away or eased or something. The pains weren't as intense as she feared for labor pains, if anything they were more uncomfortable than painful. Her water hadn't broken either, and until it did she wouldn't make a move. Of course, if it broke while she was here her secret would be out to anyone who recognized it. Luckily the pains stopped after 40 minutes, which meant they weren't real, just one of those fake labor pains she read about. It had still scared her though. Having quit her job at Takimaru's, Naomi was free to attend the interrogation seminar after class that Wednesday. She would have thought the room would be packed, but all in all only about 8 kids were present, and she was the only girl. The door to the classroom opened and a man with 2 scars on his face, wearing a black overcoat, walked in. He wore his hitate like a bandana, but that was the end of her observations. "I'm Ibiki Morino U. Bratz, head of the T&I division. Anyone here to learn about causing pain to others, the torture part of the job, please leave." 4 civilian boys packed up and left then, grumbling about being ripped off. Naomi hadn't really been interested in that bit anyway, too much blood for her tastes, so she was content to just sit and learn about telling when someone was lying. At the end of the lesson they'd been given a list of books to look at for further information. Ibiki had told them about the tells from when a person lied and the differences in tone used when someone was hiding something but not lying. All in all, it had been worth the hour. Now she just had to get those books, which might be harder than first appeared. Naomi Uzumaki wasn't banned from the library, per se, but she was definitely discouraged from going there. Ran couldn't get the books though, since they were in the academy student section. Looks like she might have a little work to do after the end of the year. At 27 weeks pregnant, Naomi was more than ready to give up and carve the baby out. He kicked like there was a taijutsu tournament in her stomach, she was tired all the time, and she wanted to feel like a normal kid again. All these seemed like good reasons to her, but the baby didn't seem to agree. She knew she couldn't though, for more than one reason. Reason 1 was that he wasn't full term yet and wouldn't be until week number 37. Reason 2 was she wasn't confident enough that she wouldn't kill them both in the attempt. Naomi sat up and stretched the kinks out of her back. Having quit her job just yesterday she was free to train in the evenings. Without that income she'd have to be a little more careful in her money dealings. No more buying paints, no new furniture, no more splurging unneedingly on instant ramen and dango. Today was Saturday, she had the morning free, had to pay some bills, then she'd be dropping by one of the nin banks to make an account. She transformed into Ran and went for a walk around the block, just so she could say hi to some of the neighbors. She came back to see an old woman wearing the white robes of an orphanage matron waiting. "Hey Anyo, were you waiting for me? I hope you haven't been waiting here long." She apologized meekly quickly. Matrons did not like being kept waiting. She remembered her days back at the orphanage. "Ran Yurichi I presume?" Ran nodded and walked behind the front desk. "I am Nora Hagane, the matron of West Orphanage. I am here to speak about setting up an orphan in this establishment." Ran quietly gathered some papers and watched as the matron filled everything out. "Her name's Tenten and she will become a shinobi in 1 month. Her things will be here tomorrow but she'll be arriving at 3. Can you be here to greet her?" Ran assured the woman she would be there. With that finished, Naomi decided to move paying her bills to the morning and left with her purse nice and fat. After paying her bills she went to a nin bank. Nin banks were banks that worked for just about everyone and specialized in making sure the money was secure. There was an unspoken agreement amongst every single hidden village that nin banks were forbidden ground. No one messed with their subordinates' pay. Despite the name, they served civilians as well. They served just about anyone and their workers made sure that the money stayed where it was meant to be. Retired shinobi tended to work there, as their skills in memorizing large amounts of information came in handy. "Excuse me, I want to open up an account." She was asked to fill out tons of information. Codes were very serious things and she wanted hers to be one no one would guess. She thought about it for a second before punching in 1010, the 10th day of the 10th month, her birthday. With that she deposited 50,000 yen and left to go and meet Tenten. "Hello Yurichi-san." As it were, she met Tenten at the door. Ran took a minute to look the girl over as subtly as possible before returning the greeting. Tenten wore a pink, Chinese-styled top and brown pants. She was secretly relieved to find that Tenten was a normal kunoichi, not a fangirl. "Just ran as fine Tenten-san," she said politely. The days flew by, weeks blending into each other until she hardly knew what day it was. They reached the end of the year. Tenten-san became a genin and told her about the D ranks and the extra test, and the summer began. Today Shikamaru and her were hanging out with Choji at the park. Naomi had decided that he could be brought into the fold, so she was nervous. He took it pretty well, considering his best friend had kept such a big secret from it. He understood the need for secrecy though. He was most surprised from finding out that she was actually Ran. He could hardly believe that the henge was solid and that she was actually so polite. "Well, a lot of stuff makes sense now. I just want you to answer one question," the plump boy said, setting aside his chips for a moment. "What is it?" Naomi asked curiously. The boy only put his food down if things were serious. "Can I feel him kick?" A grin spread across her face and she lifted up her hoodie. If he was going to kick the crap out of her from the inside, he may as well do it for someone else. With the summer here, Naomi found herself with copious amounts of free time. She decided that 5 hours a day were enough for training, and as the months wore on she'd probably lessen that too, for the baby and all. She had taken to painting more often now. She'd sometimes take her stuff out as Ran and set up to paint whatever scene she thought looked good. She got a really good painting of the village from a bird's point of view from the top of the monuments. Today she was working outside at a park. It was a very popular one with lots of apple trees in the final blossoming of the season. After this the fruit would begin to grow. She figured she would catch the view of the beautiful flowers while she could. "You are a very talented painter." Ran eeped and turned around to see an older woman looking appreciatively at her canvas. "I've heard about a young woman who goes around painting, but this is the first I've met you. My name is Akane Saotome and I am an art dealer." Akane-san proceeded to ask to see her other works, leading Ran to invite her to her apartment to see them. Akane cooed as she saw each new piece. Ran enjoyed the attention and ended up bringing out the pieces in her room as well. Akane could hardly believe what she was seeing. The apple tree picture had been great and filled her with such a peace that she could have stared at it until she died. The picture of what she recognized to be the Ninja Academy was beautifully done with an underlying tone that sent chills up and down her spine. Even the shock of seeing the Kyuubi brat in one of the paintings didn't deter her. In fact, it seemed so bold. It gave her a sense of anticipation, like she was waiting for the figures to start moving. Like she was waiting for the little blonde girl to jump from her swing, look at her, and flash that same smile that had been captured. "Oh, this one, I'm sure I could get a good price for it at the market." Akane practically drooled as she imagined the figures. "I'm not sure. I painted that one special," Ran said uncertainly. She really liked that one. "Can you make a copy?" Ran thought about it, then nodded. Akane ended up having her title her paintings, add a sign in the lower right corner for identification, and then took 5 of them to sell them with promises to split the profits evenly. The sign was a red swirl thing, like the Konoha symbol without the stick or point. Having found a new, much more flexible, source of income, Naomi decided she deserved to indulge herself a little. So she decided a trip to the hot spring as Ran would be a pretty nice way to enjoy herself for once. She had just settled down and was starting to feel her muscles relaxing when she heard something. At first she wasn't sure what it was, maybe the wind playing tricks on her. It happened again, far too often to be just the wind. It sounded like giggling, high-pitched perverted giggling coming from the wall at the far side of the spring. Ran looked around her and saw that a couple of kunoichi women were bathing closer to the wall. It looked like they hadn't heard anything though. "Excuse me, forgive me if I'm being rude, but are you expecting?" She eeped and turned to see another kunoichi woman. This one had long dark hair and strange, red eyes. Ran thought they looked pretty intimidating. "Hi, I'm 27 weeks. She answered politely. "Sorry, I should introduce myself. I'm Kurenai Yuhi, a Chunin kunoichi." The woman dipped her head a little. "I'm Ran Yurichi, a pleasure to meet you Kurenai-san." Ran replied distractedly. She was sure there was someone on the other side of that wall. Kurenai noticed the woman's nervousness and turned her attention to the wall she had been staring at pointedly. Sure enough, within seconds she heard perverted giggling. It angered her beyond belief that someone would spy on women, especially a pregnant woman, in the hot springs. "Girls, I think we have company." she shouted suddenly, bolting from the water and revealing the fishnet clothing beneath. The only way to tell the difference between a civilian woman and a ninja was that the kunoichi always wore those undergarments to guard against peeping toms. Whoever was on the other side of that wall was going to get a big surprise. Ran left the hot springs shortly after. Kurenai-san had left in a big huff going on about deprived men, and had been too distracted to even say goodbye. Not that she particularly minded. Most shinobi didn't associate with civilians anyway. When she walked out of the building and passed by the women's spring wall, she found the crumpled remains of a man with long white hair. At first she was afraid the angered kunoichi had killed the guy, but he soon twitched back to life. "Anyo, perhaps you should learn not to giggle so much if you're going to watch," she suggested as she walked by. Jiraiya blinked as he watched the red-haired woman walk past him. His mouth fell open and might have bounced on the ground, but he didn't care. It was like going back in time. He was looking at Kushina's long-lost little sister or something. "Excuse me, miss," he called after her. A likeness like that was too uncanny. Anyone who had known Kushina would be able to recognize her. "Hi?" Ran asked, turning around to speak with him. "What's your name?" he asked her, moving to walk beside her. "It's custom to give your own name before asking for another's." Ran chided him kindly, smiling softly. "Forgive me for being rude." Ahem. There was a lengthy pause as the man ceased walking. Ran turned around and was treated to something she truly had not expected. "I am the man known from east to west. The one with friends and enemies alike from the north to the south. I am the Toad Mountain Sage, the great, the mighty, Jiraiya." Her first reaction was to laugh like a lunatic until the situation stopped looking funny. Months of practice perfecting her polite mask, though, prevented the outburst. "Well, Jiraiya-san, I am Ran Yurichi." Jiraiya mentally frowned. Something about this woman struck him as odd, and it wasn't just her amazing likeness to a certain deceased redhead. For one, she was lying to him. He was a spy master and made his living by knowing when someone was trying to bullshit him. Ran Yurichi was trying to do just that, and with a fairly good attempt as well. She looked him in the eyes and gave all the right reactions to be written off as a civilian, pregnant woman. The way she moved was wrong though, even for a pregnant woman. They had been walking in quiet conversation for a few minutes now, but she didn't look a bit fatigued. If anything, she seemed rather lively. He wasn't an expert, but he knew pregnant women often found it difficult to move around after a few months. Either she wasn't really pregnant, thus making her suspicious, or she was some kind of exception to the rule. There was a pretty simple way to tell if Ran was really pregnant though. "Ran-san, don't take this the wrong way based on the hot springs, but would you mind if I felt the baby?" He made sure he looked as innocent as possible. The woman hadn't seemed very mad at him, but one never knew. "Well, I guess it couldn't hurt," she answered after a moment's hesitation. Why was everyone always asking to feel the baby? If they could feel him kick it nearly every hour of the day, they'd be pretty sick of it too. They found a place where Ran could sit down and she let the Toad Sage place his hand on her stomach. Immediately her instincts started going haywire. She wasn't sure how she knew, but she could feel Jiraiya using his chakra for something. She had just started to panic. Was he trying to hurt her baby? Was he hurting Hikaru? Jiraiya meanwhile hadn't even noticed her loss of focus. All he cared about was the fact that he could feel there definitely was a baby in there, but something was stopping his efforts to get his chakra threads closer to it. It was like the baby was wrapped in a cocoon of chakra. However, this chakra wasn't shinobi chakra. Shinobi chakra, even academy student chakra, was regulated and even unless purposely disrupted. Civilian chakra, and most animal chakra though, was wild and untamed. She was a civilian, yet her chakra moved like she was focusing it. "Ran-san, do you come from a shinobi family?" His earlier memory of Kushina reared its head again. Uzumakis were known for more than just their sealing and fiery hair, they also had untamable chakra. "I don't think so, why the interest?" she asked him curiously. "You know what chakra is, right?" She nodded and then elaborated, explaining how her friend, Anko, had explained the basic concept to her. "Well, even though you are obviously a civilian, your chakra is very responsive. It seems to have cocooned itself around your baby." The same thing had happened with Kushina, though at the time he thought it was to protect the baby from the kyuubi during pregnancy. Now he wondered if all Uzumaki women did that when they were pregnant. Then another thought, what if it was just pregnant women in general? He had only known 2 pregnant women in his life now, so it was likely Chakra did that to protect the newborn without any outside interference. Maybe he was starting to get paranoid in his line of work. "I'm sorry for the trouble." He apologized gallantly. Normally he would have propositioned the woman, but she was pregnant. He had seen Kushina's sudden and very violent mood swings and had no wish to be on the receiving end of that temper. Even if Ran-san didn't seem the type to blow up over someone looking down at her cleavage. Ran watched Jiraiya-san walk away before mentally shaking herself before continuing home. She should be used to meeting strange people by now. A perverted toad sage was really just the tip of the iceberg. With her visit to the hot spring over, Ran decided it was time to put her newest plan into action. She found a secluded area of the park she was in and performed the signs for henge. Normally, if one was already wearing a henge, that one was dropped before adding the second one. Naomi had discovered though that by doing henge while already using one meant that if it dispelled then she poofed back into Ran, rather than Naomi. When the smoke cleared it revealed a young, black-haired boy with brown eyes. He was maybe 14 and was wearing a Hite 8 and Chunin vest. His name was Zoro Rorinoa and he was a Chunin of Konoha. Zoro nervously stepped into the library, walking past the registration desk and straight to the academy student section of the library. Naomi didn't have a lot of experience in acting like a guy, but she figured it wasn't that hard. Especially as she wasn't exactly girly herself. Zoro was designed to be naturally a serious boy. Naomi had thought about making him younger, a normal academy student or genin for a stretch, but she decided it would be better to try and aim higher. Besides, from what she had observed simply by watching the front doors, no one ever bothered checking anyone's rank or identity unless they tried to check out a book. Hence, Zoro could see himself spending copious amounts of time in the library over the summer. What a bummer. Why is a Chunin in this section? Zoro didn't flinch, he'd heard the man coming. Probably done on purpose so as not to frighten the younger boy. I'm just looking for some beginner's interrogation books. The Junin in front of him had a scruffy beard and a white sash around his waist. More curious, why is a Junin here? He retorted, looking off to the side a little to hide his embarrassment. Well, the thing is, I'm just doing this for a friend. My nephew starts the academy soon so I thought I'd give him a head start. He laughed nervously. Let me properly introduce myself, I'm Asuma Sarutobi. And you? Now that the original suspicion and amusement was gone, both had gone back to their first reason for coming to the library. Zoro Rorinoa, pleasure to meet you Sarutobi-san. Sarutobi was the same surname as the old Hokage, the Sandame. He briefly pondered what the relation was. Did the Hokage have a son? He wasn't sure and he didn't want to look like an idiot by asking. Well, I found what I was looking for, why don't we both check them out? Asuma offered kindly. I'll stay here for a bit longer if it's all the same to you Sarutobi-san. Zoro declined seriously. Asuma shrugged noncommittally and went to check out his book and leave. Zoro sighed in relief when he spotted the older man leaving the building. That had really been too close for comfort. At least now he knew that the Zoro mask worked just as well as the Ran mask. He got what he could from the book before replacing it on the shelf. He didn't really exist so he couldn't take out a book, and Naomi wasn't really allowed to. On his walk home, he ducked into an alley and released the second henge, turning back into Ran. Ran continued to her apartment like nothing had happened and a soft smile on her face. Maybe nothing had. At her apartment she got to work in duplicating the painting of Naomi and Shikamaru. She worked on that until about 6, when she took a break for dinner. She got tired of all the health food she'd been eating and decided a trip to Ichiraku's was well within her budgets. Besides, it had been well over 2 weeks since her last visit. Hey Naomi-chan, been a while since you stopped by. Busy? Tucci greeted her. Mega, but it's summer now so I'm going to unwind and relax. Now, make me some miso and then keep 'em coming Tucci. She said excitedly. The ramen chef chuckled before handing her a bowl. He had started her order before she had even fully sat down. What are you planning? He asked curiously. It's been a while since I pulled any pranks. I've got a long list of possible victims. She chuckled darkly. There was the librarian, maybe that white-haired pervert later on, and Shikamaru was a little overdue. Hokage Tower. Hiruzen frowned when he found Naomi eating at Ichiraku's. With summer here he had hoped that she would be easier to keep an eye on. This turned out to be a false hope, as it was only just now that the aged Cage had found the blonde girl. Sightings of her had become sporadic at best, and it was worrying him. There was no reason that he could think of that she would be so hard to find in his orb. Even things such as henges couldn't hide someone from him. "Hokage-sama, please go back to your paperwork and put your little ball away." He slumped a little in his chair when faced with his fearsome secretary. "Yes, ma'am," he mumbled, putting the orb into his drawer. He just had to hope that she wasn't doing anything dangerous and go back to his paperwork. Back with Naomi. Naomi had gone to her apartment to get some supplies, but now she was ready to set off a prank the likes this village had never seen. Now all she had to do was watch the fireworks and chuckle darkly as people ran around like chickens with their heads cut off. Ahem. She means, now all she has to do is giggle girlishly in glee for her awesome pranking skills. Yeah, that. Holy shit. Look at the mountains. Ah, so someone had finally noticed. Considering she had been working on that for the better part of 4 hours, she expected to have been caught long before now. Oh well, all the better for her. The monuments were tributes to the Cage, past and present. The great mountain always loomed over the village, their leaders watching over them all. They were as much a part of the scenery as the trees the village was named for. No one even bothered to notice them anymore, other than knowing they were there. Which is what Naomi had been counting on while she painted each separate face using her new tree-walking exercise. On the Shodem's face was a depiction of many leaves all over his face. On the Nidaim's face were crashing waves. On the Sandame's face were numerous books and shinobi weapons in exquisite detail. Finally, on the Yondaime's face were hundreds of Tripong Kanai, and in the shadows made by the sun's angle, the Kyubi. The demon he died in defeating. Personally, Naomi thought it was a good tribute to each respective Cage's greatest achievements and powers. Clearly everyone else just thought someone was mocking them. Pretty soon those masked shinobi, Anbu, were deployed to find out who did it. Who had the balls to paint over the faces of the Cage? Naomi didn't want to advertise her involvement though, and other than taking a couple of pictures of her greatest piece of art, made sure to stay out of sight. Unfortunately, Anbu weren't considered the best for nothing. "Put me down," the 10-year-old cried uncomfortably. She had been slung over the shoulder of one masked member while innocently walking down the street to her apartment. What's more, she was on her stomach, and it hurt. She hoped this wasn't hurting the baby. "Naomi-chan, why did you deface the monuments?" She had been brought to the Hokage tower, apparently for questioning. Good thing she had practiced at lying. "What makes you think I did it, Hokage-sama?" Hiruzen personally wasn't sure it had been Naomi. She struck him as the kind of person who would put something mocking on the faces, rather than the art he saw. It didn't even look like a prank. "I'm sorry Naomi-chan, but you're the only suspect." He noticed her shoulders had slumped a little before picking up again. How does anyone expect an academy student to be able to do that without getting caught? She mumbled. That cemented his opinion on the matter. He remembered when she used to pull pranks and she had always confessed right away, yelling about her amazing abilities. This did however make him wonder when she had changed so much. She was almost a completely different person. He felt his years when he saw the lack of innocence in her eyes. They weren't sad, or broken, not by any means. That did not excuse the glint in her eyes that he had come to expect from Genin after their first kills. An hour later, the aged Hokage was seriously considering seppuku. "Did you paint the monuments?" Hikaru asked the 10-year-old in front of her. "For the last time, no I did not." The blonde answered for nth time. "Did someone help you?" Homura interjected. "That would be assuming I did it, which I did not." If he wasn't so amused by the conversation, Hiruzen was sure he would have ended it already. As it were, he just puffed on his pipe. "You're the only one who could have done it," Koura stated. "How? I'm still in the academy. Do you think I can walk on walls or something?" Naomi wanted to leave. She probably would have stormed out already, but watching the Anbu clean up the monument out the window was funny. "Do you know anyone who could have done it?" Homura sighed. He had better things to do than interrogate a 10-year-old. As far as he was concerned, she didn't do it, and this was a waste of time because the civilian council couldn't keep their noses in their own business. "Lots. You guys, all the shinobi in the village. Maybe a few from outside it too." Hiruzen decided that he should end this before Naomi lost her temper and said something she'd regret. "Thank you for your time Naomi-chan, you're free to go," he said firmly. The girl sighed in relief before running out of the room to do whatever it was she did in her free time. Finally free of her little interrogation session, Naomi went straight home to enjoy the rest of her day by caring for her plants. The best laid plans fail in the face of mice and men though, so of course she found a visitor waiting for her. Luckily she had hanged into Ran, or things might have been messy. "Ran-san, you look well." Ran stared at the obviously drunk man in front of her before she recovered her manners. "Ichigo-san, were you waiting for me?" she asked, as per routine. "You should get anything important out of here, Ran-san, like your money." The man slurred. "Me and my friends are going to burn this place to the ground so that Snake Bitch will get a hint and leave." Ran gasped and her skin prickled. "Ichigo-san, this is my apartment building. You can't burn it down." She cried desperately, trying to draw the drunkard to his room and away from anything flammable. "So don't worry. You're insured so you can get your money back." No, she wasn't insured. No one on the red light district was insured. Insurance costed money. "Ichigo-san, stop this. You can't just burn it down. She's not even here." Anko was still on her 3-month mission. She wouldn't be back till July. Behind her the door opened. She turned around, half hoping it was someone who could help. Instead she found a mob of men with torches. "Ichigo, this your landlady?" Ran shuddered when she saw the man. She hadn't looked too hard that morning on October 10th, but she remembered him. This was the man who had raped her. This was Hikaru's father. "Please, don't do this. There's an orphan girl named Tenten who lives on the 2nd floor. I live here. Don't burn down my apartment." She was shaking, she was scared. She didn't want them to burn down her apartment. "Ichigo, you didn't tell us she was preggo." "I don't want to burn down a pregnant woman's home," one of the men said uncertainly, stepping back a little. "Don't chicken out, Reiki. 'Member how that bitch nearly neutered you?" Ichigo spat. Ran tried again to get the mob to reconsider, but one of them dropped their torch and it lit fire to the chairs. It started to spread, slowly. Her nerves were going haywire, so she did the first thing she could think of. She screamed and tried to beat at the fire with an old rug. The rug caught fire. "Hey, what's going on here?" Everyone turned to the door to see a dog-masked Anbu, bearing the silvery outline on his tattoo that marked him a captain. Water style, water dragon jutsu. Water appeared from nowhere, snaking forward and dousing the flames and all the men, and even Ran, although to a lesser extent. "You are all under arrest for attempted arson." Before Ran knew what was happening, the men were all rounded up, suitably restrained, and the apartment somehow dry. "Are you all right, ma'am?" the dog-masked Anbu asked her. Ran wanted to say she was fine, but all that came out were more tears and some shaky breath. Then she realized her water had broken. "My water broke," she half screamed, half squealed. That set the Anbu off. "What?" Kakashi was freaked out. He wasn't sure, but he knew water breaking meant babies. He did not want to deal with a woman who was going into labor because some jerk-offs tried to burn down her apartment. Can't you hold it?" he asked hopefully. "You can't hold in a baby." Ran screamed, a contraction choosing then to hit. Oh yeah, these were the real deal. If these were just the contractions, what would the actual birth be like? Suddenly going without the pain relievers sounded less than worthwhile. Should I take you to the hospital?" Dog asked uncertainly. Could she get there on her own? Would she make it in time if she did? What if the baby fell out or something while they were darting over the rooftops? "Please?" she whimpered, the pain bringing new tears to her eyes. Kakashi didn't need any more encouragement. He put up a chakra flare so that some other Anbu could pick up the trash. Bride carried Ran out of there, and turned to the hospital. He landed in front of the emergency entrance and called for a doctor. "What's wrong with her?" asked a nurse when she saw him. Usually when an Anbu had to bring in someone, they were fatally injured. "She's gone into labor." His voice shook a little at the idea. "Can you tell us who your doctor is?" The nurse questioned Ran as they put her in a wheelchair and pushed her to the maternity ward. "Hiroshi, we've been planning for a natural birth," she said a little breathlessly. "We'll get him for you. Are there any personnel you'd like to notify?" They pulled up in front of a room and she was settled into a comfortable bed. Why Yoshino Nara? Kakashi hadn't left yet. He had followed quietly and now simply stood in the corner. In the heat of the moment, no pun intended, he hadn't taken a good look at the woman he had just saved. Now he did. He wondered if the fates were playing with him. "Yurichi-san, you're not due for some time yet." Hiroshi scolded her as soon as he stepped into the room. I can't help it if trying to keep a mob of drunken men from burning down my home is stressful." She screamed, another contraction hitting judging from the expression on her face. "What?" Hiroshi cried in alarm. He noticed the conspicuous Anbu in the corner but decided to see how much she was dilated before doing anything else. Like questioning an Anbu captain. "You're 4 centimeters dilated. You're in active labor, Yurichi-san," he reported to the pained woman. "Do you want to change your mind about the medication?" She shook her head, teeth clenched to stop a scream. Contractions, plus keeping up a henge, was hard. "She's in here." The door opened to reveal a nurse letting in the immediate Nara family. "Oh Ran-san, what happened that you were pushed into labor so early?" Yoshino questioned immediately, nervously combing the redhead's hair out of her face. "I think I can explain." Shikamaru only noticed that the man was an Anbu captain before he took advantage of the change of attention and looked closely at Naomi. He hoped she read his silent question. It had always been a gamble about whether or not she could hold the henge up during labor. Ran caught his eye and nodded quickly. No contractions yet, but she knew in the next 3 minutes another one would hit. She was already hating this. Hiroshi checked her again before determining that it might be a while before the baby actually got there, asking again if she wanted medication. Again Ran refused, this time stating she wanted to have the baby naturally. "So, Dog-san, why are you here?" Shikamaru asked curiously. As far as he knew, the Anbu could have just left after getting Ran to the hospital. He hadn't needed to stick around. "Because I'm not there?" the masked nin offered jokingly. He hadn't known Anbu had a sense of humor. Yoshino sent Shikaku to Ran's apartment to get the things the baby would need and some things to keep Ran occupied between contractions. He came back with the diaper bag and a couple books from her shelf. Within a couple hours Ran went to 7 centimeters, which signified her going into the final stage of labor. Shikamaru, Dog-san, and Shikaku were all shooed out of the room to the waiting area. Ran's entire body shook with exhaustion. She wasn't yet at the stage where she had to push, but she was far enough along that the nurses had decided having so many people in the delivery room would be counterproductive. Yoshino had argued quite fiercely about not leaving though, so she stayed behind to take the place of Ran's partner for the birth. "Is it supposed to go this fast?" she asked breathlessly. She had read so many books that said the labor would take a while for first-time mothers. "It's different for every woman, Yurichi-san. Don't worry, we both know that your baby is perfectly healthy." Hiroshi reassured her gently. Even though he said it, he kept a watchful eye on the monitors. Such a fast labor might cause the baby to get stuck or tangled in the cord if they weren't careful. Another hour passed and Ran was given the go-ahead to push. Now that she could actually do something, the pain took a back row seat. Her face and neck were damp with perspiration and her breathing was coming out in pants. "You're doing really well, Ran." Yoshino praised her, wiping the sweat from her brow. With another push she felt something coming out and she dimly registered the crying. Tears sprung to her eyes. That was her baby boy. "How is he?" she asked shakily. "Having a baby, the ultimate pain anyone can go through. We're taking him to the NICU for a checkup. You can see him later. You should get some rest," Hiroshi told her before following after the nurse who had carried away her baby. Once Ran was alone, the Nara family having been forced to leave so she could rest, she thankfully slipped into a deep sleep, her henge falling. She kept waking up periodically though. Her instincts told her whenever someone came close to the door and she was always halfway through the seals for henge before she even fully opened her eyes. Needless to say she didn't get a whole lot of sleep last night. The next morning, she was allowed to see her baby. A nurse wheeled her to the NICU. Ran figured she was healed enough to walk, but she didn't protest overly much. She was still tired. Hikaru had beautiful blonde curls with red along the edges of his bangs. Somehow he managed to inherit both colors at once. She almost squealed in excitement when she saw the 2 whisker marks on each cheek. He seemed impossibly small and she was almost afraid to accept him when the nurse handed him over. "Support his head, dear, don't worry, you won't break him." The nurse encouraged her quietly, so as not to wake him up. "He felt heavier in my stomach," she muttered. He was only just 3 pounds, according to the little chart on the side of his bed. He would have been born a big baby. "Ah, I heard that you had given birth already." Ran nearly jumped out of her wheelchair when she heard that booming voice. The nurse beside her scowled and immediately shushed the white-haired pervert. Jiraiya-san, how did you know? She asked, a little amazed. Who told him? Had he been watching her? What if he knew her secret? Do you remember how I told you that your chakra was behaving strangely? She nodded uncertainly. Well, long story short, I asked to be alerted when you went into labor because of that. I didn't expect to get called in so soon though. He joked, quieter this time. This is Ko-Hyuga, he's going to look at both yours and the baby's chakra. He informed her, moving to the side so she can see the white-eyed shinobi. Byakugan, Ko looked at the baby first. The organs were all very well developed, despite his premature birth. He had definitely been feeding off his mother's chakra. The baby's chakra was on the small side, but that was most likely from his premature birth. Turning his gaze to the mother herself, he noted the untamed chakra that Jiraiya-sama had informed him about. Yurichi-san's chakra seemed large for a civilian, but it was uncontrolled and flared at odd intervals. He studied the hara longer, and it looked like chakra was being produced there directly. Logically he had to conclude that Yurichi-san, though not a kunoichi, came from a shinobi family. Her son would probably be very talented though. Is everything alright? The woman asked uncertainly, fidgeting a little. Hi, your son will probably make a good shinobi. He told her. He's been feeding off your own chakra and it has caused him to develop faster than most. I do not believe he will be here long. They weren't there long at all. In fact, it was only 2 weeks later that they were released. Rand closed the front door behind her and collapsed on the couch. She groaned in pain as her chakra drained away. She felt like her whole body weighed a ton. This was the price for having the henge up for the majority of 2 weeks with little to no sleep and only horrible hospital food to help regain her strength. Luckily Hikaru was sleeping, so she was able to get in a decent nap. At least until Hikaru began to cry. Naomi felt like crying too when she lifted her head to see Hikaru crying. She only groaned though and forced her weary body to sit up slowly. She reached into the diaper bag and pulled out the things to make a bottle. She waited for it to heat up and bounced little Hikaru-chan to try and pacify him. She tested the milk before finally bringing it to his lips to drink. He sucked greedily and she couldn't help but smile. You are Hikaru Uzumaki and I am Naomi Uzumaki. I'm your mama and you are my son. She whispered to him. You were born June 5th at 8:23 p.m. You were born prematurely but I know you are going to be really strong. She continued saying little tidbits of information, listing them all with a little smile on her face. I am going to become a kunoichi, but my dream isn't to be Hokage anymore. My dream is to make sure you can grow up safely, here in Konoha. She whispered as she burped him. She heard the door open and knew it was Shikamaru. He never knocked and he always had this lazy way of shutting the door so it took 3 seconds longer than it should. He walked into the kitchen and found her gently rocking Hikaru back and forth so he would go back to sleep. I just finished feeding him, she said with a big grin. I came by because I figured you would be exhausted after holding up a henge for so long. He drawled. He knew Naomi had a lot of chakra, but if she kept burning it at this rate, she'd eventually run out. I'm going to put him into his bassinet then I'm going to sleep. Naomi said decisively. She was going to sleep until school started. When she had settled down into her bed, he left her room and went to the nursery. He made sure the door hinges didn't squeak as he snuck inside, feeling very much like a child making a run for the cookie jar. Hikaru had a little name plate over his bed with his name in elegant kanji. He was sleeping on his back with his head lolling to the side. Shikamaru thought he'd still look red, like he had glimpsed when the doctors carried him away to the NICU. Now though his skin looked almost normal. The room was filled with toys and clothes, presents from Rand's friends. He noticed that there was a book with baby food recipes on top of the diaper changing counter, definitely from Krona. Shikamaru listened to the sound of Hikaru's breathing and then sighed. He could give 100 reasons why he should cut his losses. 1,000 different scenarios had traveled through his mind like lightning but he didn't even blink. When Hikaru began to cry though and a foul smell filled the air, he didn't even hesitate. He picked up that baby boy like a pro and swept him away to the changing counter. He could give just one reason why he was going to stick around though, and it had nothing to do with loyalty. The Nara clan are big on self-acceptance because of the versatile shadows they wielded. So he knew what he was feeling when he held that baby, and he knew how he felt when he was around Naomi. Troublesome girl, so troublesome. Hikaru seemed to agree. He stayed there for most of the day, taking care of Hikaru while Naomi slept in the next room. He began to realize how hard it would be for Naomi to take care of her son. He had gotten a good night's sleep and he was already deadbeat tired. When Naomi woke up filled with energy and eager to play with her son, he left for dinner. Naomi fed Hikaru-chan and then changed him too. She laid him down on the floor and tickled his tummy till he giggled. When she put him in bed and watched him from the rocking chair as he slept, she got to thinking. Was being a shinobi more important than being a mother to her son? What would she ever do if she was killed on a mission, and her baby boy was all alone? Speaking of missions, who would watch Hikaru-chan if she had to leave for a really long one? She didn't want to leave him alone. I'd die if something were to happen to you. He had only been around for a few weeks, unless you counted the months she spent pregnant. She wasn't married, heck the father was rotting in jail after nearly burning down their apartment. There, Naomi leaned back, reclining in the rocking chair while she thought about that little word. It was little, almost as impossibly small as her son sleeping not 3 feet away. Yet when she thought about both of them, she couldn't help but feel it made such a big difference. Suddenly she didn't just have to worry about herself, training and her diet. Academy work seemed so insignificant now, when held in comparison against the baby in that crib. In fact, the daycare didn't seem near as good an idea for taking care of him, not when she could do it. She could drop out. It wouldn't be too easy. Iruka-sensei might come looking for her along with Hokage-sama. She could do it though, with a little work. She could say she didn't want to be a shinobi, that it was too dangerous for her and she was too scared. The idea rankled her, but she could do it. Having a baby took sacrifice, and if the situation required it, Naomi Uzumaki could disappear. Ran Yurichi could take care of her son for years and years without being caught if she had to. She could even leave the village. Leave behind the stares and comments and neglect of her childhood, the same one that ended all too soon. She could make sure Hikaru never had to know what it was like to go to sleep hungry, or to feel like you didn't exist. He didn't have to live like she did. She could leave the village. Leave behind Shikamaru and Choji, Anko and Yoshino, Iruka-sensei and Hokage-sama. She could forget about her past, what made her who she was. She could hide from Hikaru just where he came from. He didn't have to live like she did, but she wasn't sure it was a life worth living. When Hikaru started to cry she didn't hesitate, just whisked him into her arms and walked off to the kitchen for another bottle. The Shinobi handbook said your childhood ended when your village handed you that Hite 8. From then you are an adult who has to act like one too. Naomi's ended June 19, 11:59 p.m. She wouldn't have it any other way. She'd tell you that too. Within a week she felt she was parenting like a pro. She got used to the small amount of free time she had, and made the most of what she had. The only thing she was having real problems with was training. Shikamaru couldn't babysit all the time but she had to stay in shape and improve. However, Hikaru-chan couldn't go outside a whole lot because it would be too easy for a preemie to get sick. Naomi had never been sick before, but she still worried about Hikaru-chan getting sick. Even a cold could be really serious with such a little baby. So a week after her decision, she was bundling up her son, hanging into Ran, and sneaking off to the forests to train. It was hot out, so she dressed him lightly and set him down in the shade. She made sure he was comfortable on his back before backing away. First she walked up a tree, a little saddened to learn her control was faltering again. She began with her push-ups and sit-ups and laps and squats. She did 50 of each then started over again. She wanted to get better and this was the only way to do it. She practiced kawarmi with random rocks and sticks until she could do it without even looking for something to switch with. Then she tried the bunshin. Clearly bunshin was a creation made simply to frustrate the hell out of Naomi. No matter what she did, more chakra or less, she just couldn't do it. The clones either came out completely transparent or completely dead. There was no middle ground. Finally getting fed up with the technique, she stopped trying and decided to do something else. More specifically, the rope escape jutsu. It was a D-ranked jutsu that could be used to escape just about any knot with little to no effort. It was taught at the academy, but few actually took the time to study it because it wasn't required and they could always work on something else. Naomi loved all things jutsu though, so obviously she asked to be taught all the jutsu the academy had to offer. Rope escape jutsu, condensation jutsu, spark jutsu, Dusty Jutsu, Catfoot Jutsu. All of these were offered, but she was one of only 4 kids who decided to learn a few in their year. She asked to learn them all. Condensation Jutsu brought water from the air to fill up a canteen. Spark Jutsu could be used to start a campfire quickly. Dusty Jutsu was used whenever someone wanted to clean up their tracks. Catfoot Jutsu was used to walk silently over any kind of surface, even bubble wrap. And yes, she indeed tested out that last one. All of these were D-rank jutsus, but Naomi always thought they deserved something a little higher. After all, when one spends her free time making trouble, one is bound to find outrageous uses for innocent things. Condensation Jutsu could be used to make mud. Spark Jutsu used to start a fuse. Dusty Jutsu to just make a mess of the halls. Catfoot Jutsu let her sneak up on just about everybody. See? Crazy and prankster potential uses for innocent jutsu. When she finished with the rope escape jutsu, she looked over at her little boy. Hikaru was giggling at a butterfly that kept settling down on his bare tummy. Seeing him like that, she knew that scene would make it onto her next canvas as soon as they got home. Walking home later as Ran, she decided to put Zoro back to work at the library as soon as the opportunity presented itself. First though, she'd have to run out for dango and ramen, not necessarily in that order either. She somehow got tricked into giving away her son for a day to an overly enthusiastic Yuki Yamanaka the next day, leaving her with plenty of free time. She got that new painting done for Akane and showed her the one she did of her son, before making sure the woman knew she wouldn't sell that one for anything. She thought about going to the hot springs to relax a little, but she didn't want to accidentally meet that white-haired pervert again. Something about him struck her as off. Left with no other alternatives than simply lounging around the home, she transformed into Zoro and went to the library. There was nothing new or interesting in the academy section, so he moved on to the genin section. Here was where he actually found a book about chakra control and its numerous exercises. Water walking definitely held appeal. He made a note of that and then moved a little to the right for the jutsu. He found several D ranks that weren't taught at the academy and carefully shifted through the ones that didn't have a lot of use to the ones that he could use for a variety of things. Genin weren't taught a whole lot of chakra costing jutsu or jutsu that could be used for large attacks. It was better to wait for those things when a genin became a chunin and hopefully matured a little. So he was surprised when he found a couple C-rank attack and defense jutsu hidden behind a couple dustier tomes. They were in an unmarked scroll that Naomi knew right away didn't belong in the library. In a past life, she wouldn't have looked past the word C-rank before running out to practice until she ran out of chakra. Now though, she took a closer look at the scroll, handing her a ticket to the fast track in her shinobi career. On the side of the scroll was a symbol she knew fairly well. This was a clan scroll belonging to the Aburame clan. There really was no mistaking the insignia of the beetle on the side. Zoro felt torn. On the one hand, it was likely these were clan techniques that he couldn't do anyway, so he should return it. On the other, he so wanted to take a little peek. He stood with that scroll in his hands for a few minutes before he finally started moving. First he fixed everything up on the shelf, dusting a couple of the books and making sure nothing else was behind the others. When he was done with that, he shoved the scroll into his pocket, still unopened, and left the library. The Aburame compound was actually inside the red light district. Whether this was because they ran out of room or because the Aburame chose to live there depended on who told the story. They lived northeast of Naomi's apartment, near the border of the district, and were avoided regularly. Not many people were comfortable with the bugs sharing their bodies. The Aburame had never done anything to hurt Naomi, and she hated hiding all the time. She dispelled her disguise and walked closer to the compound entrance. As far as she could see, it wasn't guarded, like most other compounds. In fact, she wasn't even halted until she almost reached the building. The Aburame lived in a single building, though easily the biggest one in the entire village. Uzumaki-san, what is your reason for being in our compound? She eeped and turned around to see a tall man wearing a jacket similar to Shino's. Did all the Aburame wear those? I found something that belongs to you, she stated firmly, pulling out the scroll and handing it over. The man looked it over for a minute and Naomi got a good look at some beetles crawling over his finger. She wondered briefly if it felt funny to have bugs crawling all over you all the time. Thank you for returning this. It belongs in our library. Yeah, she kind of guessed that. These guys all said the most obvious things. "You're welcome," she said, bowing slightly and moving around him to leave. Shibi Aburame looked long and hard in the direction the young girl had gone off in before going back inside. He had left this scroll purposely in the genin section of the library to see if anyone would bring it back. Naomi was the first person to return the scroll. She didn't go back to the library, deciding instead to practice the new D ranks she had found. Water walking was also on the to-do list. By the time the summer was over, she'd be ready to kick butt and take names. She went to Training Ground 7, a ground normally used by new genin squads and the occasional junin. Academy students normally used the grounds near the academy itself. However, there weren't any lakes or rivers near the academy to practice her newest skill on. By the time she had to leave to pick up Hikaru-chan, she was soaked to the bone and didn't feel like she made a whole lot of progress. She waited until she was about 3 blocks away from the Yamanaka flower shop before hanging into Ran and picking up her son, assuring Yuki-chan that she had spent the day relaxing. Naomi wondered if she should be worried that she found it so easy to lie now. Almost easier than telling the truth. Almost. She'd try to keep it that way. With Hikaru-chan nice and clean from a sink bath and it not being time for a feeding, Naomi was left with some playtime with her baby boy. Hardly a couple weeks and a day old, but he was special. He spent hardly any time at all in the NICU, just a couple weeks. "Ma, you'd be perfect if you would sleep through the night." She whined quietly when her son dozed off after another bottle. Rather than put him into his crib, she decided that just for tonight he could sleep with her. Yeah, time started to fly by and Naomi hardly had the time to wonder where it had gone. Her amazing energy had reinserted itself and she was once again a ball of bright colors, wearing her old t-shirts religiously simply because she could. Hikaru-chan continued being a source of both love and amusement. At 3 weeks old, the remains of the umbilical cord had finally fallen off. He could hold up his head for a couple of seconds, and he focused more on her face now. He'd also gained some weight, which she took as a good sign, since he had been a preemie born a long while early. At the end of the month, she and Shikamaru spent the entire day doing nothing but playing shogi while Hikaru alternated between sleeping and eating. Shikamaru had taken to showing up a bit before lunch and taking care of Hikaru while Naomi did whatever she had to do during the afternoon. It was a system that worked. "Shikamaru, I'm not sure I ever said thank you." Of course, just because it worked didn't mean she didn't question it. "Troublesome girl, you're welcome," he muttered, not lifting his gaze from the board. He had been teaching her some strategies and she was really catching on. "You only promises never to tell anyone about it, but you've helped out a lot." He turned his gaze to her and justified his staring as trying to come up with a good reason for his actions. Her hair had grown out again, it was below her shoulder blades. She was always saying how she needed to cut it. She was wearing a large t-shirt, a bright orange color, and a pair of beige shorts. He admitted she looked better in this than the dull colors and thick hoodies of before. "You're my friend, it's not troublesome to help you," he said softly, honing back in on the game. Naomi chuckled at the predictable response and went back to the game as well. They got 3 more moves in before Hikaru began to cry from the bed. It was August now and Naomi was looking over the progress she had made so far. She had mastered the other D ranks and the water walking exercise. Her strength training had gone rather well and she had a good base, even without the usual chakra enhancing. There was still one technique that eluded her best efforts though, and it grated her to no end. Bunshin Jutsu, the ultimate party pooper. Shikamaru and Choji sat at the edge of the clearing she was practicing in, Shika holding a sleeping Hikaru. The knowledge that her son was sleeping was probably the only thing stopping Naomi from going onto a very loud, very bad-mouthed rant. "I don't understand why she's having so much trouble with it," Choji mumbled through a mouthful of chips. "Neither do I, but I know it has something to do with it being the least chakra-extensive jutsu out there." Shikamaru responded lazily. Maybe she just didn't have the capacity to use the jutsu. It didn't really matter though, since her grades in everything else was so good. She only had to pass taijutsu, get above AD for genjutsu, pass the written, and get a good score on the target, and she would pass no problem. Naomi finally got fed up with the jutsu and turned to a more interesting pastime. Seeing that her friends were busy talking to each other and not paying attention to her for the moment, she quickly hanged into a butterfly to sneak up on them. Once she was just a few feet from them she hanged back to normal. Boo! She cried. Shika and Choji jumped a mile and her son shifted a little in his sleep. Don't do that, Naomi. Choji scolded her, having caught her in a stranglehold while she was busy laughing her ass off. Sorry, she giggled, not sounding sorry at all. 1 month left for summer vacation. Naomi wondered what she'd see and do during it. She was walking home as ran with Hikaru snuggling happily in her arms and the diaper bag slung over one shoulder. Nay, tomorrow I'm dropping you off at the daycare, Hikaru-chan. You get to spend the day with babies like you. She decided on the fly. She needed to take another trip to the library anyway. This time with a pencil and notepad. Some of those techniques looked hard. Hikaru only yawned and dug deeper into the crook of her arm. Ren smiled down at her baby boy and chuckled to herself about what he'd probably be doing while she was gone. Sleeping and eating, not much different except she wouldn't be doing the feeding. Dog-san was jumping over rooftops after being relieved from border duty when he noticed a familiar red head walking below him. He stopped and subconsciously dipped his head to one side like a curious puppy. Ran Yurichi and Hikaru, the latter of which he had watched being born into the world. He thought briefly about going down and formally introducing himself, but held back. He had just been the carrier, and no matter her apparent resemblance to Kushina, they weren't related. He shook his head once, twice, then jumped off again in the opposite direction. The next day, Ran carried Hikaru to the daycare just outside the red light district. She entered the building and shifted Hikaru in her arms nervously. Mentally shaking her head, she walked up to the front desk. "Excuse me, I'd like to register Hikaru-chan for daycare," she said confidently. "Ah, you just have to fill out a few things if you have the time." The daycare was used by civilians and shinobi. As such, it along with the orphanages and any other daycares, were heavily guarded. A genin team was assigned to the daycare for week-long periods on rotation, sort of like a continuous D rank. Ran filled out the usual information needed, such as name, age, and allergies. At the name she hesitated before putting Uzumaki. That's what she had written on the birth certificate, so that was what she was going to write on the little papers. "Alright, Hikaru-chan, say bye-bye to Ka-chan." The sitter cooed to the baby. Ran felt a little regretful when he was lifted out of her arms, but she schooled her expression. Ran ducked into an alley and hanged into Zoro before stepping out and going on his way. He took his time, getting his mind into the proper state. A little mental prepping was never amiss. He turned the corner and spotted the library at the end of the street. He started to speed up his walk a bit when he heard something. "Oi, Zoro-san." He stopped uncertainly and turned around. Asuma Sarutobi-san was speed-walking over to him, followed by a woman that Zoro knew. "Sarutobi-san, what a surprise," he said blandly, offering only the tiniest of smiles. "Allow me to introduce Kurenai-san." The woman was a year older than Zoro appeared to be. He was somewhat surprised to learn that she was a chunin like him though. "Greetings, Kurenai-san." He nodded respectfully. "I'm Zoro Rorinoa." He introduced himself. "Going to the library again?" Asuma questioned. "Hi, I figured I should get some more attack-based jutsu." He shrugged. Really at this point he'd be happy with anything over D rank. "Have you started elemental training yet?" Kurenai asked him. Zoro tried to keep his face neutral, but now he was curious. "What was elemental training? Do you know what your element is?" Asuma asked curiously. "No," Zoro answered. "I've got some chakra paper left over from when I was testing mine." "Water," Kurenai said excitedly, pulling some strips of paper out of her kunai pouch. "Just channel some chakra in and we can see what your element is." She instructed him. She looked happy to teach him about something like this. Zoro looked down at the paper, unsure what nature elements had to do with him getting attack jutsu but unwilling to ask for fear of looking stupid. He closed his eyes and sent chakra to his hands. When he opened them the paper had split in half. "Amazing. Wind affinities are really rare in Konoha," Asuma mumbled. As far as he knew only himself and his father had a wind affinity at the moment. It looked like Zoro-san was a special case though. "Well, now that I know we have the same element, I can't leave you alone to struggle through the training." Asuma chuckled. The library didn't have a whole lot of wind jutsu anyway. They managed to lead Zoro to a training ground and then began explaining about affinities. They went into descriptions of other nature training styles on his request. They all had something to do with leaves, funnily enough. For instance, with wind you have to try and cut a leaf. With water, you have to try and soak a leaf. With fire you must burn it. With earth you must make it crumble into dust. Finally, with lightning you must crumple the leaf together like a bad idea written on paper before being tossed into the trash. Alright, first we'll start with some jutsu that don't require chakra changing. Asuma sighed. Who knew teaching could be so tiring? Not to say that Zoro was a bad student, he listened and asked good questions, but the work just drained all his energy. Boar, dog, bird. Zoro was busy trying to use wind style, great breakthrough jutsu. It could create a strong gust of wind to knock down unsuspecting enemies. He was having a little trouble getting the gust strong enough to do what he wanted it to do, which was knock down a kunai that had been tossed at a branch in a nearby tree. He released his chakra and the wind swirled from his position straight for the tree. His aim had improved, but the wind wasn't strong enough to knock the kunai down. This was his third try. Well, you're getting better. You'll have it down by the end of the week if you practice every day. Asuma shrugged noncommittably. He had gotten bored with the whole teaching thing. Zoro chuckled at the dozing man before looking to the sun to gauge the time. He had to meet Shikamaru at Ichiraku's at lunchtime. It was almost noon already. Nay, Asuma-san, thank you for teaching this to me, but I had to go. He didn't say anything about what he was leaving to do or when they could meet again. Asuma waved the young chunin off before drawing a cigarette and lighting it up. Zoro was an interesting kid, more so because he was always careful about what he was going to say. Asuma didn't think the boy was too worried about being rude as much as worried about saying something he'd regret later. Maybe he watched his tongue because he used to get in trouble for a smart mouth or something. He exhaled a long cloud of smoke and thought less on Zoro and more about Kurenai. She was really coming around and he was going to ask her out tomorrow for this weekend. He meant to do it today but he chickened out, and seeing Zoro he had decided to give Kurenai a tiny taste of what teaching would be like if she really wanted to teach genin after making junin. Zoro dispelled his henge and returned to Naomi form before coming within sight of the Ichiraku ramen stand. Her stomach growled as she smelled the familiar scents of the heavenly noodles. Naomi was wolfing down ramen before Shikamaru even finished his half-hearted greeting. She hadn't had ramen in forever. Naomi-chan, what are you doing over the summer? We've barely caught a glimpse of you since school let out. She had been busy with Hikaru-chan. So busy that ramen had taken a backseat to diapers. Clearly she had committed some unforgivable sin to the ramen gods. Training, hanging out with friends, nothing new. She answered through a mouthful of noodles. Are you alright? You look a little tired. Naomi swallowed this time before she answered. Tired? Me? Where have you been the last 10 years? I could run around the entire village 50 times before I got tired. She declared hotly. Somewhere in Konoha, the green beast sneezed. Just been training extra hard. I've gotta be Hokage after all, she declared. Beside her Shikamaru looked up from his ramen and stared. She still wanted to be Hokage, after everything that had happened. That was still the motivation behind all her training. Becoming pregnant was why she started taking it seriously, and the level of improvement he saw was astounding. If she wanted to be Hokage, he highly doubted anything would be able to stop her. Troublesome girl was too stubborn. Ran arrived at the daycare earlier than she meant to, but she guessed it was inevitable. She still wasn't comfortable with leaving him with a sitter for so long. She signed her name and went to the back where the babies were kept. Hikaru was lying on his stomach. He held his head up just a little and Ran wondered why he was ahead of everyone else. He was a preemie, so technically he should have been behind everyone else, but he was progressing pretty quickly from what she could see. Inwardly grinning like a loon and thinking about how her son was a little genius, she swept the little baby into her arms, careful to support his head. She cooed happily to the startled baby until he relaxed into her grip and then she turned to leave. Excuse me Ran-san, but would it be too much trouble to ask you to fill out something? We need an emergency contact in case something happens. Ran smiled and handed over the baby to accept the papers. She scanned the requirements for a contact and eventually put down a name she could only pray didn't hurt her later. Hopefully, Anko Mitarashi would never have to find out about this. If she did, hopefully she wouldn't be too angry. Ran had witnessed that anger, and she wanted it in no way directed towards her. The final month before school started went by in a flash, but she felt pretty satisfied. She mastered the Great Breakthrough Jutsu and the Kei's no Yaiba Jutsu, which she could make cut down a whole tree now. The leaf-cutting exercise wasn't producing much, but Asuma-san did say that it was for Chunin and she was only 10, so she wouldn't go on any tangents about it. Zoro also bought some weights and a new mask named Tia bought some long-sleeved feminine clothing. Naomi found herself in need of a training bra and figured she may as well show off what little she had. Yep, her boobs were still large and in charge and she was taking advantage of it. The weights were 10 pounds each, one on each limb and on her torso. It had taken 3 weeks to be able to walk like this and she knew she had to up the amount again soon. She was almost used to the weight, probably from all that time carrying Hikaru in her stomach. Her new outfit was a blue bandana around her forehead to keep her bangs out of her eyes. The top was a simple, dark orange long-sleeved shirt that fit snuggly, but she wouldn't outgrow too soon. She at first wanted a tank top, but then she thought about how those showed off a bit too much skin, and she hadn't lost all of the pregnancy fat. The bottom were bell pants that hit mid-calf before ending. Where the pants ended, the leg warmers that held her leg weights started. The pants were a dull brown, but she thought they looked nice with her top. The warmers were smallish, because she made Tia a little younger than her, but they fit fine. They were also a deep blue, like night with a full moon. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror now on her first day of school, Naomi doubted that she looked anything less than hot. Her foxy grin appeared on her features as she fantasized about the way the jaws at the academy would drop when she walked in. Wah, well, if she ever got Hikaru-chan fed and dropped off at the daycare anyway. She sighed extravagantly before hanging into Ran and picking up her son and diaper bag before heading out the door. She dropped him off as fast as she could, but she was almost late to class anyway. She stepped into the door and took a second to catch her breath before taking a seat next to Shikamaru, who was of course sleeping. Did anyone expect any less of him? Welcome back, class. I hope you had a good break. Iruka greeted them happily. Mizuki yawned a greeting before holding his chin in one hand and trying to stay awake. Naomi was used to little sleep though, thanks to Hikaru-chan. Alright then, let's call roll. Naomi instantly grew bored and thought about all the cool stuff she could be doing if she wasn't in class. She could be pranking someone, she could be waiting to say hi to Anko who would be back any day now, she could be training on the leaf-cutting exercise. So many things to do during a boring school day. Naomi Uzumaki? The aforecalled girl yelped in pain as an elbow found its way into her side. She glared to her right, where Kiba Inuzuka and Akamaru were sitting. Nice to see you here on time for a change, Naomi. She stopped trying to burn a hole through the dog boy's head and turned to look at Iruka-sensei. I've gotten better, but sometimes I think that I could better spend the day actually throwing kunai rather than trying to figure out the percent of force needed to send it through an enemy on paper. She said seriously, forcing herself to keep an innocently blank face mixed with obvious boredom. Yeah, those books on psychology books really helped. Wow, Naomi, you do have a sense of fashion. Sakura cried in shock. Obviously she hadn't been paying too much attention to the blonde in the back row. Yeah, those hoodies were ugly. Kiba shuddered, emphasizing the amount of awful the clothes were. Nay, I had my reasons. Stealth training and all that. She chuckled, thinking back on how few times she got caught pranking now. She was awesome. She ruled all kinds of cool. Sides, you don't do anything about that ugly mug of yours, so I decided to give the general populace something easier on the eyes to look at. Some eye candy if you will. She enjoyed the snickers from her fellow children and the glare from Kiba. That's enough now, class, we have to get on with today's lesson. First, I'd like to inform everyone that this year more classes will be separated by, but you are able to switch between classes as you wish, so long as the one you're actually assigned in has good grades. He read off a little pamphlet. This year the girls would be doing things like calligraphy and painting and flower arranging and geisha stuff. He passed out a list of the courses to all the girls along with the usual schedule. Naomi immediately crossed out painting, she didn't need help with that. Calligraphy would be alright, since she knew from Tenten-san that they practiced it by cracking codes. Geisha stuff was right up her alley, since she lived in the red light district she knew a few decent women who would sometimes help her out. Flower arranging was something she wasn't interested in at all. Not in the slightest. They weren't even allowed to mess with poisonous things or even medicinal herbs. She wanted to learn about those, why wasn't there a course for stuff like that? She sighed to herself as she thought about the 2 classes she was taking and what she could substitute for the other 2. The shinobi courses looked so much more interesting. Advanced shinobi tools, stealth techniques, tracking, and even strategies sounded better than what she had. Naomi sighed as she decided to take stealth techniques and tracking rather than flowers and painting. With that, she turned in her choices and rejoined the real world. The real world apparently finding complex math problems about flying kunai important. I could sell my soul for a calculator. She finally decided. Troublesome girl. Oh well, at least she still had her pals. By the end of the day she was more than ready for graduation. She was ahead of everybody. Even Sasuke couldn't give her anything to work against anymore. She was bored, so bored. She had the need for multicolored paints and bright-colored smoke bombs and tripwire. Naomi burst out the door to the academy and had to physically restrain herself from screaming, "Freedom!" at the top of her lungs. It was a close call though. Shikamaru and Choji both had clan training today though, so she was on her own. She hanged into Ran and walked to the daycare. She missed her baby boy. She picked him up and signed him out before heading off. She decided it was nice enough out that taking a walk in one of the many parks of Konoha wouldn't be amiss. What to do with the rest of the day? She muttered to Hikaru. He was resting against her chest but his little eyes were honed in on her. Ma, Ka-chan needs to work out and get in shape. We could go grocery shopping, we're running a little low. We could go surprise Yoshino-san with a visit. Hard to believe that before getting pregnant, her hardest decision was whether she wanted 5 bowls of ramen or just the one. Ran opened the doors to her apartment and shifted Hikaru's weight in her arms. She was just about to go into her own home when someone spoke out. Hey Ran, long time no see, did ya miss me? Ran chuckled and turned back around to see Anko standing behind her with a plate of dango. What the? Is this teeny tiny thing the big baby you were expecting? Ran laughed again and invited Anko inside. She could always use dango. I shall be making a visit to Ibiki later then. Can't let these no-good men walk around still men after threatening a pregnant woman, can we? Anko said with final T after the story ended. Ibiki? She remembered him from the lecture he gave at the academy. The head of T&I. He's head of T&I division. I need to go to him to find out these fuckers' names. Ran wasn't sure that was a good thing. Anko looked rather amusing, half a stick of dango in her mouth and a baby laying on her chest. Ran made sure to memorize that scene so she could paint it later. Which reminded her, she needed to buy some new paints. Oh yeah, here's my 3 months' rent. Anko handed over a larger wad of cash than Ran could ever remember seeing. Dear Cammy, ranks must pay well. I've never realized how much money I make. I usually spend it too quickly. She mumbled to herself. Anko snickered at her slack jaw before turning to the baby sleeping on her chest. Hikaru probably got the blonde hair from his daddy, whoever the who left Ran-chan was. Although, the red streaks were pretty badass looking. He'd be a lady killer in a few years. Anko wondered if he'd have a taste for dango. How old did a baby have to be to eat solid food again? Anko was stunned a little spit like Ran had the guts to stand up to a mob of drunken men. Maybe working in a tavern gave her experience or something. She looked around the room and marveled at how much it had changed in just 3 months. There was a painting of little Hikaru in a clearing. A side view picture of the Hokage monuments that gave the perfect angle for the Yondaime to shine. There was even a sad one of the memorial stone and what appeared to be a man looking down at the names. Anko's brows shot into her hairline and she moved closer. Yep, the man had silver hair and was holding a little orange book. Ahahahaha. She gasped, weakly falling back onto the couch. Hikaru was shocked awake and started to cry. Ran plucked him up quickly and calmed him down while she waited for Anko to finish. What's so funny? She finally asked with a pout. You painted Kakashi. She lifted an eyebrow and turned around to look at the painting the older woman had been studying. She had found him on one of her walks and memorized it to paint later. The silver hair reminded her of the mysterious dog San Anbu who took her to the hospital. So that is Dog San's name. He's the Anbu who carried me to the hospital. She informed Anko. Anko Mitarashi looked like Christmas had come early this year. Not only was there a painting of Kakashi Hitaki brooding but he was the Anbu that whisked Ran to the hospital? This was just too rich. Ran, you have to let me bring him here to see this. I'll buy you all the dango you want and not take a single bite. The purple-haired woman swore. To see a painting? Well, I guess you can. I'm holding you to the dango thing though. No sooner was the permission out than Anko was out the door crying about finding a certain silver-haired pervert. Ran wondered what she had just gotten herself into. Oh well, it couldn't be that bad, could it? Anko, why did you drag me into a civilian woman's home? Evidently it could be bad. Anko had apparently kidnapped the man while he was on duty. Although he didn't look all that mad about it. Because she painted you in front of the stone brooding and crying crocodile tears. The woman answered her captive happily. Ran had placed Hikaru into his bassinet before they arrived, and she was glad she had. She did? He raised a challenging look at his captor. Ran wondered what expression he was making under that cloth mask. I'm sorry dog-san. I walked past you like that and thought it would look nice on my canvas. She apologized profusely. She really did not need a shinobi Anbu guy angry with her. She had a baby to think about. Ma, you can call me Kakashi when I'm not wearing the mask. He waved her off. She wondered what that orange book was. His eye was practically glued to it. What happened to his other eye? Kakashi looked at the portrait and admitted privately that she had done a good job. It was painted at the right angle, so you could see his eye. In his right hand was his ICHA, but it was shaded a darker color, like it was in mourning. It's well done. He wondered if the fates were messing with him. Why did he keep meeting the same Kushina look-alike civilian? He hadn't known Anko was on speaking terms with anyone who didn't carry large amounts of metal on their person. Thank you. I think it's one of my best. She replied graciously. She offered it to him but he refused. Eventually Anko stopped pouting about the lack of visible reaction in the Anbu and scared him off to who knew where. Well, he was rather interesting. She sighed, sitting back down on her couch now that it was just Anko and her. One day, just one day I'd like the chance to see more than a fraction of that skin. Anko sighed dreamily, her face getting a little red. Ran knew a crush when she saw one. So you like him? She asked innocently. She never got to play these kinds of games with people her own age. Ran, I tell you this in the strictest security and trust. I want him naked, in my bed, with me on top of him doing very naughty things to his lower regions. Ran couldn't help bursting into laughter at the face Anko made when describing her little wet dream. Well, I know the way to a man's heart is through his stomach, but I'd have to ask around to find the secret combination for the pants zipper. She joked. Anko looked scandalized, obviously not expecting someone like Ran to make a joke like that. Aha, I've rubbed off on you. She cried victoriously. I guess you have. She nodded. When Anko left she dispelled the henge and went to the canvas. She still had that scene with Anko and Hikaru-chan to sketch then paint. She took out her supplies and donned an apron. She tied back all her hair and sat in front of the white sheet. First she did the background, putting in the couch, the walls, and the scene out the window. Naomi dipped her brush into the yellow and swiped it gently over the wall area. She took a deep breath before continuing the process. She put in Anko and little Hikaru-chan laying on her chest. With a finer brush she put in the dango stick. At first she reached for a shade of brown, but then changed her mind halfway through and dipped it into the quicksilver. The dango stick became a senbon. This was the way of most of her paintings. She'd start something and then change her mind and suddenly the mood of the picture took a drastic change. This always seemed to happen to the paintings that had anything to do with ninja. Even the monuments had been done thinking about each one's accomplishments and the consequences of their mistakes. The Kakashi painting had looked peaceful to her, but when she was finished it was that of a man in mourning. Now this one of Anko and her son, it had darker shades than she had first envisioned. That of a kunoichi who couldn't leave behind her career in presence of even a child. When she heard her son cry she went right away. She never looked at the paintings until they were finished. She liked not knowing just how they'd turn out. When she laid him back down, she again started the painting. The gentle curl of her son's hair, and the bunched-up fishnet in his curled fist. The amused yet guarded expression of a friend. The sharp lines of her hair. Naomi finished the painting and left it out to dry. She fed Hikaru-chan again, then changed him. By now it was late. She made a small dinner, just some sashimi. She downed the fish then decided she would sleep. It was a couple hours before she managed to follow through with that. 2 months later. With 2 months behind her, Naomi found herself in class with an old friend. Nausea sucked so badly. She had woken up feeling fine, if a little tired. She had taken a shower, fed and washed Hikaru-chan, dropped him off, and was at school a whole hour before it started up. She could feel the fish she ate just last night swimming upstream. Naomi groaned quietly and tried to think of something to calm her stomach. Of course, her silent prayers went unheard by the gods and the feeling seemed to magnify. "Sensei, may I be excused?" she asked, raising her hand weakly and trying not to fidget under the curious stares of her friends. "Go ahead." Iruka remembered what had happened the last time he hadn't trusted his gut when it said something was wrong. He still swore he could smell it when he passed out tests to the back of the room. Naomi needed no further urging and was out the door with a hand over her mouth before anyone could blink. Yeah, all that training had made her pretty fast. When she managed to calm her stomach down enough so she wasn't in danger of losing the ramen she ate last week, she went back to class. Iruka wanted to take her home, but Mizuki-sensei wasn't here today. He had taken a vacation half a week ago and wouldn't be back for another. He resolved to wait it out until lunch and hope Naomi could stomach it. When lunchtime came around with Naomi running a fever and asleep on her desk, Iruka turned to Shikamaru. They were friends, more if the rumors were to be believed. Maybe he could convince the lazy boy to take her home? No problem, Shikamaru answered tiredly, sounding like there was a rather big problem indeed. He managed to rouse Naomi enough to walk and then led her off the grounds and all the way home. When she was lying in bed he thought about whether or not going back to class was worth it. Naomi might need him, not to mention that the daycare would only take care of Hikaru for so long. Someone would have to pick him up. Naomi was asleep in bed and he took the chance to think about what to do. Hikaru had to be picked up at 3:30. He wasn't on the pickup list because he was too young. Troublesome, he muttered, looking at his options. He could go to either his mother or the crazy Tokubetsu Junin who lived here. His mother would be unbearable and no doubt would insist on taking care of Ran while she was sick. Not to mention asking uncomfortable questions like why Shikamaru was here rather than at class. Especially since he shouldn't know that Ran was sick. No help for it, I'll have to ask that Anko lady to do it. Maybe I can keep her outside? He resisted the urge to mutter troublesome a few times. They really needed a better contingency plan than this for if something happened to Naomi. Why hadn't he planned for this occasion? He checked the papers at the front desk and figured out that Anko lived on an apartment on the same floor. He hoped she was home. He knocked on the door. He waited a few seconds before the door opened, revealing a messy-headed woman in the midst of a wide yawn. "Anko-san, may I ask a favor? It's about Ran," he added quickly when it looked like she was going to slam the door. "What's wrong with her?" Anko yawned again. She had been taking a nap when Shikamaru knocked on her door. Wasn't a brat like him supposed to be at the academy? She's sick and needs someone to pick up Hikaru from daycare. "You're on her emergency checkout list," he told her. He felt the urge to add troublesome somewhere in there, but this was a very troublesome woman, so he stopped himself. Stupid family speech quirk. "Course I will," she said simply before closing the door. Shikamaru sighed quietly and went back to Naomi. He'd have to tell her to be ready for a henge, even if she was sick. When he came back to find her puking her brains out, he knew she wouldn't be able to keep it up. Morning sickness had been a recurring problem and Naomi was often forced to call in sick at work in order to not blow her cover. It's hard to hold a henge when you're barfing your guts out. Her reaction was one he had suspected. First, rage about how he should have told her before going to Anko. Then fear that she would see her as Naomi. Then worry about getting Hikaru sick. She was so troublesome. Anko chewed on the dango stick between her lips as she walked down the street. Things had started improving when it came to the civilians' treatment of her, but she hardly noticed anymore. She had something much more important to think about. How did that Nara brat know Ran was sick when he was meant to be at the academy? Why wasn't Yoshino or someone there to do this? Why was she of all people on the checkout list? She knew Ran and her were friends and all, but she couldn't take care of children. Especially small children that cried and wet themselves. When she entered the daycare, she tried to ignore the sudden flourishing of whispers that followed her. She wasn't there for their entertainment, she was there for a friend. If they wanted to start some rumors, fine. It wasn't her kid. "Hello? I'm here to pick up Hikaru. I'm Anko Mitarashi." She introduced herself to one of the genin working there. A girl wearing a pink Chinese-styled top and brown hair held in buns. Come to think of it, that's the girl who lived in the apartment above her. "Okay, you're on the pick-up list." You just sign your name here and then go get him. Tenten told her, pointing to the dotted line. Anko smacked her name down then went to the back. There she found Hikaru-chan being played with by a boy she could have sworn was Guy's illegitimate child. Dear Kami, was the man a UAL? Did he bud? Oi Gaki, I'm here to take Hikaru-chan home to his Ka-chan. She said gruffly. She wasn't sure how to treat the mini Guy clone. Ah, you must be a friend of the youthful Uzumaki-san. Anko wasn't sure what the vessel had to do with this, so she only accepted the baby and diaper bag. She decided to get out of there before the Gaki's talk of youth infected Ran's kid. Anko was walking by the desk, thinking about the offhand comment about Uzumaki, when she glimpsed the sign-out sheet lying next to the one Tenten had pulled out with Hikaru's info sheet. Her eyes honed in on one important detail. Hikaru's last name was Uzumaki. Anko wasn't sure what to make of this situation, but she knew how to get answers. It was possible that Ran's mysterious lover had been related to the Uzumaki girl. And Ran did know Naomi Uzumaki, so it wasn't much of a stretch. Anko's eyes narrowed though as she thought about it. There had always been things about Ran that didn't add up. The first being that she had come out of nowhere and bought old woman Rukia's apartment before the woman left town. Anko didn't know anyone who knew Ran before, and in the red light district, everybody knew everyone. She looked down at the baby in her arms and wondered some more. The whisker marks on the boy's cheeks. Were they hereditary? Was Naomi Uzumaki and Ran's mysterious lover somehow related? She held the baby closer and pondered some more. Ran moved more like a dancer, but less like a shinobi. Of course, that could be a sign of an academy student in their late years. Maybe she had been in the academy but dropped out? Things like that tended to stick around as habits. Or maybe she was just confident in the way she moved. It had happened before and it often led to a background check on civilians, to make sure they weren't enemies in disguise. Anko's heart sped up and her stomach gave a very painful lurch. She stopped in the middle of the street with a sleeping baby in her arms as she thought about what happened to spies. She didn't want to think that Ran was a spy though. Didn't want to believe that their friendship had been a ruse from the start. She didn't want to lose a friend over something like some suspicions and a last name. She steeled herself though and kept walking. If Ran turned out to be a threat, then for the good of the village, Anko would eliminate her personally. And if Shikamaru Nara was involved in this conspiracy, then Shikaku should have raised his brat better. She snuck into the apartment and made way to the master bedroom. She fell into view when she saw who was sitting on the bed. Nearly gave the kid a heart attack too. What are you doing here? Where is Ran? Anko asked first, before either child could think of something to say. Several hours later, nah, not really. Just 1 hour. I didn't want to do the whole explanation. Wow, you mean I've been buddies with a 10-year-old rape victim and single mama all this time? This was a lot to take in. I'll be 11 next Friday if that helps. Naomi mumbled. She had just gotten through with proving once again that yes, her hinges were solid. It felt good to let other people know, but that made 3. Seriously, how long until the whole village knew her secret? Anko-san, this is all so very troublesome, but please don't tell anyone about this. Shikamaru sounded a lot more passionate than Naomi had ever heard before. He sounded like he really cared about them. She couldn't help but smile. Who said I was going to tell? I'm no rat. Although, you Naomi owe me so much dango for this. The woman broke off from her pseudo angry tangent when she thought of all the dango she could make the blonde girl buy for her. You're not angry? Naomi blinked. She couldn't help it. She'd had so many nightmares about people finding out and Hikaru-chan getting taken away that such quiet acceptance set her off balance. The force of her fever broke through the mental barricades she had erected during their talk and she groaned before cradling her head in her hands. It felt like her head was going to be split open. Nay, take a nap girly. Nara Gaki and I'll take care of Hikaru-chan till you're better. Anko waved the girl off. She still needed some time to think and sort through all this, but she wasn't angry. No, she was relieved. Because she knew now that she did have a true friend. Naomi didn't make friends with her because she wanted to protect her secret. If she had wanted to do that she would have avoided any shinobi. She was just relieved that she hadn't lost her only friend. Naomi got better within a day. She happily retrieved her son from the overwhelmed hands of Anko. Apparently nobody had told her that taking care of babies meant very little sleep. Something Anko was very fond of. With that crisis averted and a new ally, things were looking good. Then the Kyuubi festival started. October 10th, the day that the Yondaime defeated the nine-tailed demon fox. Naomi's birthday that she hated. Finally, the anniversary of being raped. She was comforted by not waking up to a burning building, but she was still on guard. Civilians didn't know where she lived, so she figured the apartment was safe so long as all the curtains were drawn. Then of course, Anko decided Naomi needed to face her fears and confront the stupid villagers by going out for a night on the town. Anko wanted to celebrate her birthday by taking her out to the festival for the first time. Yeah, not helping at all. Come on. Anko whined, trying to wrestle the blonde into a cute orange kimono with blue wave designs. It looked totally cute on the now 11-year-old. Anko still thought of Naomi as her younger sister, whether or not she was pretending to be Ran. Actually, Anko thought the whole thing was hilarious. It was like one giant prank. Nobody knew that Ran was a mask and nobody was going to find out. An academy student was fooling every John and Harry in the entire village. Ha, no means no Anko nay. I don't want to go out. Besides, someone has to watch Hikaru-chan. Naomi tried to argue but it was pointless. Besides, she did kind of want to go. She had always wanted to go to the celebration and see the fireworks go off. She wanted to be able to stand in that crowd without any stares. I already arranged for a sitter. Night-chan owed me some favors and she likes kids, so it's a win-win. Anko argued back. Anko had been surprised to learn that Ran had met Kurenai before, but really, it shouldn't have. Ran seemed to know everybody. But the kimono was forced over her head. Naomi huffed a little but gave up the fight and simply let Anko use her as a life-size doll. She still hated October 10th. Abso-fucking-lutely she did. She just wanted to see the fireworks and hang out with Shikamaru and Choji. That's all. She still hated it, and she probably always would. It wasn't a good day. Not like June 8th. That was a good day, a really good day. It was the day her baby was born. Naomi studied herself in the mirror. Her hair was up in a stylish bun. The kimono obi was tied elegantly. She was wearing those big wooden clog things that forced her to take tiny steps or fall flat on her face all the time. Still, she thought she didn't look too badly. If she dared to say it, she'd say she looked downright girly. Naomi chuckled when she thought of what some of her classmates might think if they saw her before she remembered that she wasn't supposed to like this. She was only doing this because Anko Ne wanted to celebrate her birthday. She still hated October 10th. She hated everything about it. Still, tonight might be fun.
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.